of the Living History program of Duke University, it is my pleasure to preside over an interview with King Michael of Romania. Duke University is honored by King Michael's presence and by his willingness to be interviewed by the panel of historians whom we have gathered here today. They are, to my right, Joseph Anderli, Professor of History at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Warren Lerner, Professor of History at Duke University, and Roy Melbourne, a former member of the United States Foreign Service, at one point stationed in Bucharest. I am Joel Colton, Professor of History at Duke University. May I begin the questioning by asking King Michael, would you be good enough to explain something about the formative influences on your life from the very earliest years on? Your education, your training, your family. We would very much appreciate if you would begin in that way.
Well, I think the very, very beginning, as you say, I can't say I can remember very much because all these upheavals in Romania began when I was not even 6 years old. That is when my grandfather died. The one thing I do remember fairly well was my mother being there. And of course she helped me a great deal. Although all the details, I'm afraid I could not really remember them at that period. What I do remember came much later, after my father came back. And that is a whole long story. I don't know if we have to go into that right now, but that was in the 30s, between 1930 and 1940. These were the years when I was in school. My father did institute a special school for me with about 12 boys from all the different regions of Romania and 2 ethnic groups also. That, of course, gave me a very good understanding of the different regions, the different provinces of Romania and where they came from. And then we had 1 Hungarian and 1 Saxon, with a variety of numbers of school, because it started about 12 and we ended up by 4. This went on from 1931 or 32 until 1940. I'm not quite sure the equivalent of the United States education, but we had what we call in the French the bachot. That was the very last exam before going to university. Mixed with this schooling, I also had to do my military training. This might sound a little bit unusual, but in our tradition in Romania, the Crown Prince, when he became 16 years of age, he became an officer. So in these early years, I had to do a mixture of normal school and military training. I don't know if any more details you would like to know.
Was this in Bucharest always? Or?
Well, it depended. In winter time it was in Bucharest, and then in summertime we moved to the summer residence up in the hills in a place called Sinaia. So it was between the two. Mm-hmm. And then in the mid-30s, we had a very interesting program because the last month of the school year, we took off with a whole lot of boys together with all the teachers, and each year we visited another region of the country, and the courses there included geography and history adapted to that particular place in the country. So we got really to know in great detail all the different history and things that happened in those particular places. I don't know what else you would like to know.
Well, you referred to some of the crises that took place in your early childhood, and we would be very much interested in having you recount a little bit about the events that were associated with your father, King Carol, if you don't mind.
Well, unfortunately, these things happened before the age where I could really understand what was going on. I do know from later on I found out my father, unfortunately, he left my mother and went off with somebody he should not have. That is why, in fact, when my grandfather died, I became king at the age of not quite 6 under Regency. But
The Regency, was that your mother?
Yeah, no, that was done by Parliament. It was my uncle and 2 other people. Not to go into too many details, but things were not going very well in Romania, so then the political parties decided that they should, after all, call back my father. And that is how in 1930, in June, he came back, and he became king then. So I became crown prince. This is in a nutshell, if I could say. Because contrary to what many people think or believe, my father, I think, had a rather jealous character. And besides the schooling that I just talked about, he never really did keep me posted to what actually was going on in the country from a political point of view. So when events of Europe caught us up in Romania and he finally had to leave, I was suddenly caught up in a certain situation which I had not actually been fully prepared for. I don't know what else.
Well, we would be interested in learning how you were able to cope. Did you have people around you who were helpful and giving guidance?
In the very beginning, of course, it was extremely difficult for me, but this is a very long story. But around 1938, there was a whole turmoil going on in Europe, as probably you all know. Hitler was getting more and more powerful. Countries were changing their frontiers, occupations were going on. So my father changed our democratic constitution that we had since 1923, made a new constitution in 1938, which was not exactly dictatorial, I can't say that, but it was not exactly what we used to have before. We had an extreme political group, which was called the Iron Guard, which was in fact upheld by the Nazi Germany. This is all getting, let's say, very concentrated because the story is quite long. And then the situation in the country was getting a bit out of hand. My father's reputation, unfortunately, based on a certain truth, he was not very much, people didn't like him very much because of his private life and certain things in politics. We had a man that everybody knows as our dictator called General Antonescu, who was very much against my father's way of life. He had criticized him quite openly. So my father finally put him, not exactly in prison, but he was shut in a monastery. He was not allowed to go out. It's practically a prison. So when this political situation in Romania got out of hand, my father found himself in a very awkward situation by which he had to call this General Antonescu and bring him out of prison and make him prime minister. So from one thing to the other, we're ending up in September 1940 where Antonescu began by taking away the great majority of his prerogatives. So Antonescu became not the chief of state, but what they call the leader of the state, which in Germany would be Führer, so the equivalent of like Hitler. And one step further, he decided that my father could no longer remain as king, and he asked for his abdication. And this happened on the 6th of September 1914. Whereupon I found myself in the situation of having to take over from my father without having been properly kept posted of what exactly was going on.
And you were what age at that time?
In September 1940, I was 19. No, not even 18, really. So all this happened, I had to take the oath. And to use a rather unusual expression, I felt a bit like a fish out of water. Luckily, Antonescu called my mother back, because in the meantime she had to leave Romania because of this person that my father brought back. And thank God for that, because I don't know what myself and the others would have done if she hadn't come there. And she was really the pillar in my life.
Were you an only child?
Yes, the only child. So I inherited the situation from my father, by which Antonescu had nearly all the prerogatives, and he was leading the country. And whatever prerogative I had was just very unimportant. So really, in fact, I was a sort of a figurehead and nothing more. This was 1940. And this situation lasted for about 4 years.
Let's go back just for a moment. And I will ask any other members of the panel if they would like to intervene with a question. But let's come up to this point where you take over as king and move back just a little bit. Is there anyone who would like to? Go ahead, Professor Anderli.
Sir, I would like to ask you if you could go still farther back into history and give us a brief history of your family when they became the kings of Romania, and also indicate the relationships of your family to other royal families of Europe.
Well, we are in a way related to all the royal families of Europe in a variety of ways. This gets rather complicated to explain, but I myself am the great-grandson of Queen Victoria. And that comes through my grandmother, my father's side, who was the granddaughter of Queen Victoria. The daughter of the Duke of Edinburgh, Alfred, the Duke of Edinburgh, was the son of Queen Victoria. And together with this, we are related to the Russian imperial family, the Danes. It's quite complicated to explain the whole thing, but this is just in a nutshell. From my mother's side, of course, it's Greece. And the Greek royal family originally comes from Denmark, in that way. So I don't know if I can call it this. It's a real complicated cocktail in a way. But we are related to, in various degrees, with all the royal families of Europe.
Do you have any recollections of your grandfather, King Ferdinand?
No?
Do you have any recollections of your grandfather, King Ferdinand?
Very, very little, because he died in the summer of 1927. I was only about 5 years old. The only real thing I remember that he was at the time very ill, towards the end of his life. They had put a big tent out in the garden where he could relax and take it easy, and I do remember that he was lying in a sort of sofa, and I think this must have been just a few days before he died. That is about the only recollection I have.
And I guess you would not have much recollection about being king between 1927 and 1930, right?
Well, that, of course, was difficult to remember.
I wondered in the 1930s, despite being isolated from public affairs, but maybe through your studies of Romanian history later, if you could tell us something about the internal situation in Romania and eventually also external relations with other European countries, especially when the period of the coming of the Second World War came.
Well, as I said then, I was not really properly kept posted with all the political developments. We were concentrating more on my schooling. But of course, we knew about what was going on with Hitler, with the takeover of the various countries. And this was a sort of general complex in Europe, if you could say. It was sort of a development of dictatorial types of government at that time, which of course Romania being a relatively small country right in the Eastern Europe, were very difficult to escape from this. We have been criticized many times that we didn't stand up for certain things, but in this whole complex, it was very difficult to be able to get out of it, especially sorry. We had certain guarantees from Britain and France, territorial guarantees, political guarantees. Then the situation with Hitler came up. France and Britain could not guarantee anymore. Hitler started putting on pressure. So somehow to try and steer between all these things, one had to not make up to the German Nazi, no, but we had to somehow try and arrange oneself with them. And that way it was very, very complicated for us, and that's why this situation ended up with my father having to leave after. And contrary to what many people said, he was not at all in favor of Nazism or Germans and so on, but we couldn't very well do otherwise, having been left completely alone. On top of it, we're in a geographical situation, which is also very complicated. We have a big border with the Russians, and then we have the mouths of the Danube. And the Germans were after that one way and after our oil. So it was a sort of compromise, political compromising.
Okay. Let me go back to the 1930s again, if I may. As you've noted, and has been backed in various studies, you were kept apart from world affairs and domestic affairs during that period. But everybody knew who you were, that you were the Crown Prince after all. Was there anybody who tried to reach you or to try to influence you, saying the day may come when you will be the king, and try to establish a rapport with you or an influence over you?
Apart from learning constitutional, well, not learning constitutional law, but that was one of the subjects in school, our history and so forth, no. Nobody really tried to come to me, as you say.
Nobody tried to reach you or have an influence on you?
No.
No. Okay. These people who were with you in this special school, were they the same people all through the 30s?
Well, in the span of 10 years, you know, the boys had changed, some of the teachers changed.
Yeah.
But basically it was the same thing.
The
yeah.
students, I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, did these become important people for you to have as advisors when you became the king?
It was especially important to be able to learn the different, of the different regions of the country. That was the main thing.
Yes. Well, so what I'm driving at is, since you were kept apart from the political arena, and since none of the people in politics had access to you in any major measure. I'm just wondering, just naturally, you would tend to look for advice and support from these people whom you've known all these years.
No, I've not knowing any of these people intimately at all. It was I didn't even have any contact with them except on official occasions. I saw them coming in and out of the palace, but otherwise, no.
All right, now let me jump ahead to 1940, if I may, when you became king. In reality, I take the early period, you were just king in name because of your very much too young to be a king back in 1927. Given the world situation at the time, the collapse of France, the ascendancy of Hitler, and the coming invasion of the Soviet Union by Hitler, were there considerations in Romania of building a greater Romania through an alliance with Germany, say the area called Transnistria, perhaps the Hungarian border, the DeGrande with Bulgaria, and areas such as that?
Well, Greater Romania, as we called it, that became Greater Romania after the First World War, from the Treaty of Trianon in 1919.
Okay.
And that's when we got Transylvania to Romania, we got Bessarabia, well, that was already before. And it was under my grandfather. After the First World War, this treaty was signed, and that's when the Greater Romania became Greater Romania.
Yeah. But I'm talking even greater Romania. I mean, the area of the Black Sea coast, which was, I think, called Transnistria.
No, Transnistria was the piece of land between our Dnistra, which was the Bessarabian eastern frontier, and Bug, with the capital of Odessa. But that had nothing to do with us.
How about the DeGrande with Bulgaria?
Yes. And that is something we can go into a little after, because Antonescu had certain aims on this.
No, I'm just wondering if, well, of course you say Antonescu really had the power in 1940 anyway, but if there was an attempt to use the alliance with Germany, not so much out of necessity, but out of ambition, to enlarge Romania.
This was really Antonescu's dealings afterwards, where he made these alliances with Germany, joined the tripartite alliance. Our people were not too happy about this, but the general situation was that we were left alone. That was a difficult thing.
Well, also, let me also go back in the 30s again, this attempt to acquaint you with the various ethnic areas of Romania. Romania, of course, like most East European countries, has a great many nationalities or ethnic groups in it. Was there any plan, as it were, to develop an ethnic policy when you became king?
No.
To address the concerns of these ethnic groups?
Our Constitution of 1923, which was my grandfather that put it in function, we had all the safeguards in there for all the different minorities. Hungarians, Germans, the Jews, the Bulgarians, all the rest of it. I mean, the rights, duties and rights of all Romanian citizens were guaranteed in this constitution, which, contrary to what many people are saying, and I find this is an extremely unfair judgment on Romania, that we do not have a democratic tradition. This is not true. Our democratic tradition started already from 1866, when Karol I came there as reigning prince of the two principalities at that time. And it went on all the way until 1938, when my father changed the constitution. So all the provisions of this constitution of 1923 already were there, or what everybody has been talking about now since the war. And that is something I think that has to be very well understood, because we did have these things.
One final question in that period, and I'll defer to Mr. Wilburn. Although you were not then king, had you heard, or even any discussions or expectations of the alliance known as the Little Entente, the arrangement with Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia and Romania? That any hopes were expected of that?
Yeah, well, again, as I said before, all these things, I saw them happening. We, of course, discussed them, we read about them.
No, I'm just asking for a vicarious impression, what you may have heard
Yes,
at that time.
but apart from reading them, discussing about them, so on, nothing much more happened as far as I personally was concerned.
Okay.
If I could, now a little question about that same thing. In 1938, France abandoned Czechoslovakia and so did Yugoslavia. But usually history books admit that Romania remained faithful to Czechoslovakia until the very last days, despite the fact that they had this difficulty with the Russians. The problem was how the Russian allies of Czechoslovakia could reach Czechoslovakia in case of a war. There was necessary an agreement between Romania and Russia that would allow Russian troops to pass through Romania. And historians are arguing still today whether there was some kind of an understanding, not necessarily an agreement, but understanding that if the war would really come, that the Russians would be allowed to pass through Romania. And I wonder if in your later years you have seen evidence or heard from knowledgeable people whether there was such an understanding.
No, at that time we did have absolutely no arrangement with the Russians to go through Romania, no. No, but when Poland was taken over by the Germans and by the Russians,
Pardon me, gentlemen. We're again having a technical problem with the audio, which we need to check for a few minutes before we go any further. Maybe a problem with one of the microphones. It'll be just a moment.
We had a big audio glitch happen. I'm not sure. I want to check everyone's microphone. It sounded as if someone hit their microphone, and since then we've been experiencing some serious problems. About 3 minutes.
Oh.
It was in sort of in the period of the last question before.
Probably throw
If
your
you can
question.
remember where you had started just now, so we could maybe pick up with your question when we break this down.
About the Little Entente.
I'm sorry to interrupt like this, but we wanted to make sure we got all this on tape.
What about the mics? They look all right?
Yeah, I wanted to just make sure that everyone's was still properly
I think this is
positioned
all
on
right.
their
This
time. Just trying to do a little checking here. Everybody seems to be okay in terms of position.
That question. Right.
Okay. Okay. Romania, like many East European countries, has a diversified blend of ethnic groups, some of them competing with each other, some of them with demands on Romania. I was just wondering, at the time you became king, what efforts were made to, if any, to address these ethnic groups and the role they played in Romania?
Well, I'll have to explain that in our Constitution of 1923, which was modeled from the Belgian Constitution, adapted to our specific needs, all the guarantees for Romanian citizens as far as duties and all their ethnic, as you call it, ethnic groups, everything was guaranteed there. And they had the same rights and duties as all other Romanian citizens. There was absolutely no difference. But at the time, 1940, of course, when my father left and so on, the Constitution 1923 was no more in effect because my father had suspended it in 1938, and then when Antonescu came, the whole thing was done away with it.
I wonder if I could come in with a question that is slightly related to the minority problem, especially the Hungarian minorities. In that regard, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia formed an alliance called the Little Entente with the purpose of checking possible Hungarian revisionism. And it became then a very important factor in the developments of the 1938 crisis. Czechoslovakia was in the end abandoned by France, but also by Yugoslavia. But Romania remained loyal to Czechoslovakia until the very last days. It was difficult for Romania because if the other alliance with Czechoslovakia, the alliance between Czechoslovakia and Russia, would be put in effect, it would have, the Russian troops would have to pass through Romania. And the historians debate still today whether Romania gave some secret agreement an approval to the Russians for the transition through the Romanian territory. I wonder if maybe through studies of recent Romanian literature on this subject, you can say whether there was such a secret understanding.
No, as far as I know, there was never any understanding of that kind, whatsoever. On the contrary, when Poland, I could say, disappeared from the map of Europe, with the Germans on one side, the Russians on the other, there were hundreds of thousands of Poles that flew through Romania. And although the Germans had asked us to keep them there, we made a shot an eye to this thing, and the great majority of them went through and became resistance leaders. Even I think some of the Polish government people in London came through Romania. Many of the troops that fought to the Allied side in North Africa and other places came through Romania. So if we would have had some arrangement with the Russians, this could not have happened. No, there was none.
Thank you.
Now you'd like me to talk? Your Majesty, I just was interested in the fact that earlier you had said that, of course, I know what a strong bulwark your mother must have been at a terrible time such as you were experiencing as an inexperienced young man in those great position of responsibility. But were there any other people who influenced you, say some of your old classmates that were with you, those, say, the four that remained of your class? I'm thinking of someone like Yonitsu, anybody else that you knew that came trusted in terms of you came to like them and trust them and feel they had good common sense and you learned, in other words, from them? Were there any other people that you knew along those lines?
No, I'm afraid after we finished our schools, the whole lot of us dispersed, except for Yonitsu. I don't know why, but somehow we became, if I could say, he was my best friend during school, and then for a short period after that he also had to go away, but then I got him back. And he remained with me ever since we left Romania in 1948. He became not only a close friend, but I made him my private secretary afterwards. And I think we were both, I can say that, we were both on the same frequency. We discussed a lot of things together, and that helped me a lot.
Yes. So I should say in that preliminary period until you became king in September 40,
the two most important influences were, of course, when your mother came, and then also Yonitsu as such. Nobody else that you could think of?
Unfortunately, no.
That's right. That's very interesting. I think because, to me, the next question I raise is, I think it's remarkable that in the short space of 4 years, from September 6, 40 to August 23rd, 44, that you were able to acquire this sense of judgment and discrimination in political operations. And in other words, taking advice and understanding the worth of that advice from various people in terms of your operations as king during that very turbulent period. How do you account for that?
Thinking back on it, I'm not quite sure myself, but the main person was, of course, my mother, as I said before. Yes. And then as months went by, we did manage slowly to get hold of a number of people, have a team. This, of course, was extremely difficult and to a certain degree rather dangerous because Antonescu, and this is something I don't understand because after all he was a fairly intelligent man, he was a good officer. I think he had the mentality, as far as I'm concerned, as they say, as father, as so son. So he didn't like my father because of certain things in his private life, which none of us agreed, but I have the impression that he thought that I was going to go on the same way as that. He didn't seem to be able to understand anything different. So all the people that we had in the court, in the palace, my ADCs, masters of the court, head of the military household, and so on, were all named by Antonescu, and it turned out that they were all spies. Every single thing we did, we thought, we talked, had to be reported. So that made things all the more difficult to have a proper team which was really honest and devoted to me and for the whole cause of Romania. But anyhow, we managed somehow, we did get some. Maybe you even met some while you were there, was a man called Mocene Stârcea, who was an old family of Romania, and they had the country at heart.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and he's still alive now. So we did finally manage to have a certain number of people as a team, but this was slowly, not straight away.
Let me come back for a moment to General Antonescu and the Iron Guards. Did he model himself on any of the other European dictatorships? What kind of following did he have? Did this come out of some kind of deep-seated restlessness and dissatisfaction among the Romanian people? Or was it a coup by him from above?
This is a rather difficult question to answer because he was a good officer. I'm absolutely convinced he was a good patriot. He loved his country. There's no doubt about that. He had a very awkward character, though, because whenever, after he took over the situation in Romania, he always used to talk with this third person. He never said, I this or that. He always used to say, General Antonescu thinks like this or does that, which was already very awkward. Whether he modeled himself from others is difficult to know, but it seems to me that as time went by, it's sort of this Führer-like attitude sort of went to his head slowly. And he couldn't do anything wrong, everything was right and so on. The following he had was mostly because he tried to denigrate my father. With certain things he was right, of course. But because we had a very bad crisis in 1940, as you probably all know, when Ribbentrop-Molotov made an agreement and they took the Baltic states, the Russians, and then they took our province of Bessarabia on one side. Then you get the other arrangement between Hitler, Mussolini, and the Hungarians. They took nearly half of Transylvania, the northern part of Transylvania. The Bulgarians took the southern part of our province of Dobroja. This left a very, very unfortunate political situation, and of course many people blame my father because he didn't put up a fight, which maybe from a patriotic point of view something should have been done to indicate something, but from a practical point of view it was impossible. You had the Colossus from Russia, and you had the Germans doing what they've been doing all that. We were left in the middle. We had to try and sort of steer between all this thing. Anyhow, Antonescu played on this, trying to say that by my father's attitude, he dishonored the country, dishonored the army. So in that sense, he managed somehow to get this thing through, especially in the army. So it was a very, very awkward situation, and he had a certain amount of following on these points, in the very beginning anyhow. And it even went so far, criticizing my father and so on openly, that I finally had to give a communique in the press saying that this had to stop, because after all, no matter what happened, after all, he is my father. So we can't continue with these things. And it did stop. That's quite true.
Joel, could I ask one question? You were talking, I was interested, sir, in terms of forming the team, how difficult it was. Could you give us indications to who this team consisted of at the time? When you became king, how it slowly evolved?
Exactly all these details.
I know I'm not talking about details, but I mean general sequence. who they were and that sort of thing.
Well, it started working between my mother and Ioniciu, and then finally we found Stircea, Moționist Stircea, that came as my private secretary. And, you know, from one person to the other, they knew somebody else. Stircea knew some other people, and that's how we got connections, underground, of course. And slowly, slowly, from this very small group, we spread out into the opposition political parties. But everything was underground because it was too dangerous because of the Germans and Antonescu. So it did grow slowly, slowly, and it culminated in 1944.
Don't jump ahead to that.
No, sorry, jumping.
I'm just saying this one more question. That is, if you had this group, do you find any difficulties of possibly Antonescu planning some of the people that you first trusted and then found out that they were informants for Antonescu and had to drop? Did you run into that problem?
Yes, I'm afraid that happened quite a few times. Although at that very early stage, we had not gone into anything that could have been considered, let's say, dangerous from a political point of view. It was just getting acquainted with each other and small things, but that, of course, made us think 2 or 3 times after that before we could trust anybody.
Just 2 short questions on that 1940 situation. One, did your father attempt through others to influence you after he abdicated?
To give what?
To influence your decisions. Did your father try to reach you through others to influence your decisions?
No, once he left, it was finished.
There was no indirect contact, or
No.
you should do this or you should do that?
No.
No, okay. The other is really a point of information, which leads to things. In Romania, does the army take a personal oath of loyalty to the king?
Yes. That is, I think, like any other country, they took the oath to the head of state.
To the
Yes.
Head of state.
Yeah.
but not to the king per se.
Well, no, but I
In
was,
some countries that is done. You know,
even if Antonescu was the Führer, as they call him, I was still head of state, so then they took an oath.
Now, the reason I asked that, I was wondering if even army circles themselves, whether there was some ambivalence about following Antonescu, who is known, to be differently disposed than you were.
No, in the very beginning, no, there were no questions of that. They just followed.
Okay.
Let me follow on that question and we move forward a little bit in time. When Romania entered the war on the side of Germany, were you as king involved in signing the declaration of war?
No, that's a good question. First, he joined the tripartite pact. Made his alliance with Germany. He even forced me to go and see Hitler on one of my trips. That's just a small detail. Anyhow, in June when Romania declared the war for the Russians, in fact, my mother heard it on the early BBC transmission. I don't know, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. She came rushing into my room, woke me up and said, this is what happened. We were all rather dazed by this situation, so later on, early in the morning, I called up the Prime Minister, who was also called Antonescu. We called him the small Antonescu, Michael Antonescu. And I said, what is this? Romania declared war on Russia, and I don't even know anything about it. So he had really, I would say, the cheek to tell me that I thought you were going to hear that on the radio, read it in the newspapers. That's how it actually happened.
Constitutionally, though, this was possible.
Well, the Constitution was abolished then. There was no...
One-man rule.
Well, now we've reached this very interesting point then of the period in which you are king and the country is at war. Would you tell us a little bit about this period leading up to 1944?
To begin with, myself and all the Romanian people agreed fully that we should take back our land, Bessarabia, because we all consider that Romanian land, we still do now, but not 1 inch further. So Antonescu with the rest, we finally ended in Stalingrad, lost a whole lot of people for nothing, because he had a very awkward idea about this, saying that going east we were going to gain our rights in the west, in other words, Transylvania. But none of us agreed with this. Well, this is a long period which somehow tried to concentrate it, but as the war progressed, we very well realized that we are getting into a situation where we would not see the end. So that's when our team began spreading and enlarging and getting more people with us, contacting the opposition parties, which, funnily enough, that I must recognize with Antonescu, that being opposition parties, they were not put away, they were not put in prison, like happened in some of the other countries. They even had radio transmitters with the Allies during the war. Well, that spread also more afterwards. So then we started, from myself, putting out feelers with these other elements in the country. Not so much in 1941, because that was at the very beginning, but the second half of 1942, we put the problem to all these people and said, this is going too far, we don't know where we're going, how are we going to get out of this situation? And that is when we started very seriously discussing among the opposition parties and other people of good faith to try and find a way, how are we going to get out of this war? Of course, that culminated in 1944, but it was a long story to go about this. I don't know how much you want to go into this, but we finally, I think it must have been in 42, mid-42, where our two political opposition chiefs, Mr. Manu and Bratianu, sent some people out in Ankara to begin with to try and contact the Allies, and then later on other people, some of those in Cairo and Egypt, to really discuss with the Allies ways and means of getting out of this thing without too much damage. I don't know how much
No,
more.
this is
you-
good. Please, yes, continue.
As time went on, the situation got worse. Stalingrad was happening,
Which is late 1942,
Yeah.
early 43.
and then in '43 we accelerated all these contacts with the Allies. We had a certain amount, quite good contacts with the United States and Great Britain until late '43 and '44, when suddenly we were told that they would not discuss anymore with our group, which already had formed this political nucleus of opposition, unless we brought in this group, the Communists and the Social Democrats. Now, the Communist Party was illegal in Romania from the 20s already. There were about 400-500 members of the Communist Party in a population of 20 million, plus another 500 or so sympathizers. So, I mean, it was insignificant. At the time this request was made on us, we did not exactly understand how could we bring in the communists in a democratic type of opposition.
From whom did this request come? The British, the Americans?
It was done through these representatives that we were contacting in Cairo and Ankara. Of course, it came probably from Washington or from London. And afterwards we understood that this was from the Russian pressure. They were not going to discuss with our real democratic people unless they had these others in there. And that really shook us in a way, because they were insignificant, they meant nothing. But we only understood this much later.
The communists were a very insignificant number.
Very.
Were the Social Democrats a larger
Or
group?
even smaller.
Oh,
I mean, the Social Democrat head of them, a man called Titel Petrescu, he was a decent man. He was Romanian, I mean, he felt Romanian. So that might still have gone down, but the communists, that was the great shock to us.
and so when this kind of pressure built up on you, did you break off the talks with the
No, we had to
Allies?
continue because we were already engaged in a certain direction and we had to go on with it. So we had to bring them in.
Ah, you did.
Yes, we had to.
Did it make a difference, though? I mean,
At that beginning, no, not much in the beginning, because we all agreed that we had to finish with the war and get out as soon as possible with the least damage. That is. Even in 1943, because we used to have Voice of America, BBC, pounding at us on the air, get out, get out, get out, because otherwise you will not be able to show your face in the civilized world after the war. That's how they were telling us. So then we answered and said, fine, get out, but how? Who's going to help us? I mean, the Germans were enforced, they were in Russia, they were partly going through Romania all the time. Never got an answer, never. We even, one moment, guaranteed a certain part of the country that was going to be freed from the Russian troops if we would have a massive parachuting of armaments and troops and so on, one thing and another. Not an answer, never. So we were left in the air, so to speak, trying to do what we could on our own. And this went, well, cut a long story short, this went on all through the end of 43 and 44. Well, a lot of things, other things going on in the meantime, because we heard that Antonescu was also trying to make contacts with the Russians.
Was there some basis to that?
There is, because he did it with the Romanian legation that was up in Stockholm, in Sweden, with the Russian ambassador, a lady called Madame Colton.
Oh, yes.
He got some sort of agreement or some sort of something that went on there that we never were, he never told a word about that to any of us. We found it out through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Romanian one, because we had someone there that was in charge of the cipher. If you like, it was our spy into Antonescu's camp for once. And we knew what was going on to a certain degree, yes. But to
Now, with the war going on, wasn't the surveillance that someone like Antonescu would exercise getting tighter and tighter over all
But
of you?
there again, I come back to what Antonescu's mentality was about me. Because he considered me as a, let's say, a stupid little child that didn't know anything, and he's the only one that did everything and so on. And he actually said it later on, I can tell you.
Well,
So
I think
even if
what we can do is
even if his intelligence people and even the Gestapo, which I'm sure must have smelled something going on there, I think Antonescu must have told them, don't bother because that's just child play. Huh?
King Michael, let's pick up with this. We're going to have a break. Am I right about that? And then we'll pick up with this. King Michael, if we may go back to those years, 1940 to 44, when Romania was, in a sense, a part of Hitler's Europe. Could you tell us a little bit about how Romania adapted to this situation? For example, how did the Jews of Romania fare in those years?
Yes, that is, I think, a very important question, because it is either not known or then it is on purpose being distorted. Of course, being under the Nazi influence, certain rather unfortunate things did happen with the Jewish population, and that was especially in the very, very early stages, late 40, 41, when at that time Romania was, because of Antonescu, what they call legionnaire state. Legionnaires was, in fact, the Iron Guard, the extreme right. And they, like all Nazis, were dead against anything that had to do with the Jews or anything of that kind. There were a few unfortunate things that did happen, which luckily enough did not last very long. I'd like to point out also that except for one place, Iași, which was the capital of our Moldavian, no Jew had ever worn the star.
The Star of David.
No. Yes, many of them had lost some of their jobs. They were put out in the streets to clear snow and things of that kind. Then after the war began, a certain number of them were taken by Antonescu and moved out of Romania into this part of land which was called Transnistria, the other side of our border. With all these things going on, I was in constant contact with the chief rabbi of Romania, Dr. Shafran, which I still see once in a while now in Switzerland. And he used to inform me of either what was happening or what he knew was going to happen. Somehow, how this really came about, don't know, but we were very lucky, between my mother and myself, to impress on Antonescu to stop whatever he was doing against the Jewish population. I remember he was looked at us a little bit with a funny expression in his face. He had a rather a smile which was sort of strained smile. Anyhow, he accepted, and once more we managed, between my mother and myself, with Antonescu's cooperation, to bring back these Jewish people that were sent over to Transnistria. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the number must have been around 400,000. We got them back and saved them from a much worse fate. God knows what would have happened there if the Germans came back where they were retreating anyhow. And this is something I think is very important, that the free world should understand, that we did do whatever we could to save these people. My mother's mentality and myself was that, after all, these are human beings just like any of us, and not just because they come from a certain race that they have to be treated differently. On top of that, I don't think many people know that my personal dentist was a Jew.
Your personal
dentist.
Oh.
And he used to come to me until the very day we left. My mother's eye doctor was also a Jew. Romanians, but Jews. So I mean, that proves that although Antonescu did not like that, he did put pressure on me, my mother, to stop using them. I refused. And I mean, this is in a nutshell a situation that went on then.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very interesting.
Because unfortunately there are certain elements around in the Western world now that are trying to say the opposite. I don't know if it comes from the communist influence or what, but they are trying to insinuate that we did nothing to save them. Another point, not one single Jew from Romania ever was sent to any concentration camps run by the Germans. Not one. There were some sent, as it was said, from Romania, but those were from northern Transylvania, which at the time was under Hungarian administration. And that's also very important to know that we from Romania never sent any Jew to any concentration camp. Never. And that, I think, was thanks to my mother and myself's influence with Antonescu, which was unusual in a sense that he accepted this. Maybe he had a little spark of human feelings in him all the same.
Interesting. Let me ask you one other question about these years. Did you have the opportunity of a personal encounter with either Mussolini or Hitler?
Yes, I was going with my mother to Italy to arrange something with a villa she had there in Florence since a long time. So Antonescu, when he heard we were going to Italy, he said, well, you have to absolutely go first to see Hitler. Why we have to go all the way up to Germany to get to Italy, that's another question. Anyhow, yes, I met Hitler for lunch. I was often asked what my impression was of Hitler. I don't quite know how to characterize this, but whenever he got on some subject that interested him, all discussion, all conversation was out. He's got a sort of glass-eyed expression on his face, and you couldn't budge him from anything. I don't know what you call that. It was very unpleasant to see this sort of thing. Luckily enough, that was the only time, the only time I saw him at the beginning of the war. I had met him once before when we went on an official visit to Britain, to France, and came back through Germany. We went to Berchtesgaden up on the mountain there, but I had nothing to do with him then. I just met him. Coming down to Italy, of course, we went to see the King of Italy and the family, and we had to see Mussolini, of course. Maybe I was lucky enough because I speak Italian. I don't speak German very well. So speaking Italian, with Italian, things went a little bit easier, and then, you know, the Italian Latins, we're Latins. He gave me the impression he was like a good old Italian fatherly type, you know, although politically he was something else. But I mean, in private relations, he was quite completely different person to Hitler. Unfortunately, he also made some stupid things.
Any other questions before we move on to these?
I have one, if I might. I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry, Warner. Go ahead.
Okay. You referred quite correctly to the Romanian sacrifices for no purpose at Stalingrad. As I remember, Romania took very substantial casualties in the Stalingrad campaign. Where I quite agree, of course, this was to no purpose. Looking backward, I wondered if you might think that if it had not been for the Romanian sacrifices in a nonsensical campaign, would you have been able to assert yourself against Antonescu in 1944? In other words, that public disillusionment over what happened at Stalingrad
Yes,
may in the long run may have assisted you.
the whole population was, of course, morally, we were prepared to break with all this because they were fed up with it. The interior situation of Romania was not too bad. Politically, it was bad. So it had nothing to do with the fact that there were any difficulties, economic or other, there weren't. But politically, all the population and all the political forces in the opposition were so fed up with what was going on. I mean, everything was ripe for something to happen. And the backing I had when we managed finally to change was, I would say, extraordinary for the given situation at the time. We can go into more of that now.
I was just interested in terms of the development of these circles that you were talking about, as over time and experience, winnowing out what you consider to be the trustworthy people and those from the questionable ones. Who were your main contacts at that time with the opposition parties and the other leading political forces in the country that were opposed to Antonescu? Who were your leading associates?
Can I call it clandestine arrangements that we had were with my secretary Ioniciu, Moceni Stârcea. We had someone in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Cipher, Bujești, and a number of generals, which head of the military household, and one or two others. Sănătescu and Aldea was called, and one or two others. And when periodically we used to meet with the opposition heads, the chiefs. Well, I think this needs a little bit of explaining because not many people know about all this. The main one was the National Peasant Party. It's called National Peasant for a very good reason, that before the First World War, Mr. Maniu, he was the head of this party, which in Transylvania, which was at that time under the Austro-Hungarian group, it was called the National Party, because they were fighting to become part of Romania, where the greatest majority of the population were Romanians. In the old kingdom, as it was called, in the south of the mountains, the Carpathians, we had a peasant party, led by a man called Mihalaki. So after the First World War, when the Treaty of Trianon came and was signed, and Transylvania came to Romania, the two parties came together and they became the National Peasant Party under Manu, who he said he did the revolution up in Transylvania. That was the main party in numbers. The second very important party was the Liberal Party, and the leaders of the Liberal Party was the family of Brătianu. And they were the party that actually built up modern Romania with the monarchy. They were mostly on the financial side. So these two were the main parties in Romania. And of course the small communist group and the Social Democrats. So whenever some special event or something that we had to discuss came up, we used to have them come on the sly in the evening, brought by different ways every time, and they came to the palace, and then we sat together with them several hours discussing not so much what should be done, we knew that. The thing was how. That was the great problem, as we had no help from outside, no help of any kind. So we had to discuss how this could be done, what arrangements should be done, which part of the military, which part of the civilian. So this went on all through 44 until the end.
Was this a result of ineptitude on the part of the Allies and their intelligence, or was there a feeling that it was kind of a hopeless situation, that you weren't going to make a change in Romania with Antonescu in
No,
power?
I can't say it was hopeless, no. It was a difficult, grave situation, but not hopeless. Because we still had enough confidence in ourselves that even if we have absolutely no help, some solution was going to be found to be able to do it ourselves. And that's in fact what happened.
Well, let's move into how it happened, because in an earlier remark, I think you were responding to the question of whether Antonescu tightened his surveillance in this time of war. And you said he did, but he somehow had the attitude that the king wasn't very capable of any kind of independent or resolute action. Would you tell us a little bit more of how things moved together in 43 and 44?
Well, that is leading up to our change of politics. In the early part of 1944, the situation in the front was getting worse and worse. And we were still having no indication of help of any kind from outside, from the Allies, including the Russians, of course. So we finally decided that we have to do something about this urgently. Well, I'll try and concentrate a bit. We decided that we were going to do something in August, because that is when the Russians broke through a front in the northeast of Romania. Together with that, I had information, and this is also important, because one of Antonescu's own ministers, which was more loyal to me than to him, he came and told us that he heard that the Germans had taken one or two divisions, among which the big Großdeutschland, the Panzer division from Romania front up to Poland. So that also gave us a little more chance that we might be able to try something. Then this break in the front came, and we decided immediately that I'm going to call Antonescu and ask him, or press on him, that he should make the armistice and break with the Germans and get us out of the war. And we had decided this for the 26th of August. This worked together with what was happening on the front. And on that, I personally made up a telegram, which was sent after through Mr. Manu's radio, to General Maitland Wilson, who was commanding in Italy. asking for United States heavy bombing in certain strategic parts just north of Bucharest where the Germans were massed. So that went out for the 26th of August 1944. The idea being that when the bombing raid came on, the sirens would go, everybody would go into air raid shelters. Antonescu was going to be with me, so things we hope would be a bit easier. But what happened on the 21st or 22nd of August, through an indiscretion from our doctor in Sinaia, where we were at the time, found out that Antonescu was going on the 24th of August on the front. So that threw us a bit in a flutter, if I can put it that way, because if he'd gone on the 24th, there was no telling when he was going to come back again, and we will miss the best occasion. So the date of the 26th was arranged with the parties, so they all disappeared from Bucharest and went into hiding that they used to do periodically. So I came rushing down to Bucharest. We got in a huddle with all the people. We got together quickly on phones, and we said we'll have to get Antonescu before the 24th, which meant the 23rd of August. So I called him. As usual, he was always a bit late because he tried to show that he was the young Antonescu, small Antonescu as we call it. He came on time. So there was a moment of slight panic, thinking that maybe he got wind of something. Anyhow, he turned up half an hour later. The main idea was that we had discussed it with the opposition parties, was to try our very best to get Antonescu to make this armistice and get us out of the war. And of the various plans, his arrest was the very, very last resort. This is contrary to what many people believe.
Sure.
So he came there, and together with me was the general who was the head of my military household, Sănătescu. And we went on discussing for say an hour and a half. Well, backwards and forwards, he started getting rather angry, raised his voice, and at one moment, this is what I mentioned before, when Sănătescu said that after all something has to be done, and if he doesn't want to do it, you better resign or get out of there or something. So Antonescu on his high horses suddenly turned around to him and said, "What, leave the country in the hands of a child?" That was his mentality. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing else to be done. So then I told Antonescu, this was all part of a prearranged plan. So I said, well, if that is your attitude, I'm sorry, but there's nothing else I can do. So he looked at me a little bit, so what do you mean? And I answered nothing, but outside there was a captain from my guards and the 3 NCOs. This was all arranged. So when they heard this from me, it was a signal that they should come in. So they came in, they stood at attention to me, and then I just nodded my head. And I didn't want to be present when this went on, because with all the, how should I say, the animosity, Antonescu's behavior with myself and my mother, I did not think it was very dignified all the same that I should be there when this went on, you know. So the only thing I saw was that the captain put his hand on Antonescu's sleeve, and then I walked out. So they arrested both of them and took them out. This is, I don't know if it's very funny or not, but My father had, on the first floor of this house, he had a room which was in fact a safe where he kept his stamp collection. So this was the only place where we could put him where he wouldn't get away, you know. So now it sounds funny, but it wasn't very funny at the time. Led upstairs, so when he got up on the first few steps, he turned around to the captain, and my EDC who was also there, and he said, "You'll all be shot tomorrow morning," and he spat at them. Oh, not very dignified, but anyhow, they laid him up there and shut the door and finished. So that's when the real work began afterwards, because we had to get hold of all these people, and 3 days before the time. The telephones, one thing and another, and then we absolutely had to get Antonescu's people to put in the government.
This is the afternoon of August 23rd. This is happening.
Yeah. And something else I should add, that the troops that were normally in Bucharest were no more in Bucharest. They were outside of the town, sort of around. And in Bucharest itself, we only had young recruits that had done 3 months of training, that was all. Anyhow, the telephone lines were burning, if I can call it that, and we got nearly the whole lot of these government officers mostly. Came to the palace under the pretext that I was in a very grave conference with Antonescu about the front and the situation, and we needed their help to explain. Well, they all came, and one by one they were arrested and put away in the guards' barracks, all except the Secret Service man. He refused flatly to come, a man called Cristescu. Anyhow, we got away with it. He surely went and told the Germans that he smelled something happening, but so in a nutshell, that is how it happened. So by the evening, I made up a government of purely technicians, naming the 4 members of the parties as ministers without portfolio to have a political backing. But the actual work was being done by officers and others that were technicians. What's that say, around 9 o'clock, I think, suddenly the German ambassador turns up. A real nasty fellow, a man called Baron Killinger. And he asked me what is happening with Antonescu. I'm afraid there I had to say a lie because the situation was much too difficult. So I said, Antonescu came, he realized the difficulty on the front, and he's gone, resigned, and now here we have a new government. I don't think he believed a word of it, but anyhow, we had to take it. He just sneered at us, and he went away. At 10 o'clock in the evening, I made my broadcast to the country, saying what happened and what we were hoping in the near future. We changed the alliance, and we went back to our traditional allies, which in fact meant the United States and Britain. Well, in a matter of 1 or 2 minutes, the square in front of the palace was so full of people you could have dropped a minute. Absolutely extraordinary. And in the army, the order I gave to stop fighting the Russians and all that, there was not one single defection in the whole army, except the immediate ones which were taken by the Russians, of course, but otherwise no. That was really very extraordinary, because after all, they'd fought all those years together with the German army. Whether they liked it or not liked it, the question didn't come. When I gave them the order, the whole thing changed just like that overnight. And that is important to know, I think. I forgot to mention something else, that was it for N43 or 44, the British sent 3 people parachuted to Romania, One was a man called Chastelain who worked in the oil industry in Romania. He spoke Romanian as well as Romanian. He wouldn't know the difference. Another man, Ivor Porter, who was a young captain at the time, and Mețeanu, was Romanian origin. Of course, they got dropped in the wrong place. They got caught, put in prison, and Antonescu let them transmit from prison to the Allies in Cairo and all that what was going on. It was quite extraordinary, this mixture of Antonescu aligning himself with the Germans, bringing our country to the state in which it was, and at the same time letting these people transmit from prison, and he refused flatly to let the Gestapo take them. He said they were our prisoners and it's our business. They did come to interview them once, but they never put their hands on them. And after my broadcast, the 33rd of August in the evening, I suddenly remembered, I said, where are these people? I mean, we used to call them as a joke, we said the spies, which in fact they were friends. So I said, where's the spies? Get them out. And about half an hour later, which was really very impressive, in the middle of all this turmoil going on, you see 3 British uniforms walking in. And they had great difficulty getting into the palace because they were brought from the gendarmerie barracks by car. And when the crowds there suddenly saw British uniforms, the whole thing was swamped. They could scarcely get out of the cars. They were taken on their backs. Anyhow, they got in. It was, I must say, a very, very touching moment there. And the Chastelain, we sent him back with an aeroplane next morning to report what was happening. So, I mean, this is in a nutshell.
Whatever happened to Antonescu?
Well, this is another thing that I think needs clearing up. The General Staff, Romanian General Staff, strongly advised me to leave Bucharest as quick as possible in the morning because the Germans were going to make reprisals, which in fact they did. They bombed the house that we lived in and part of the palace. So I left at 2:30 in the morning. Another detail is that we were trying to get the guard from these political representatives of the government to look after Antonescu because we were a little bit afraid that something might happen like happened with Mussolini, you know, when the Germans got him out. The national peasants didn't have anybody on the hand. The liberals had nobody whatsoever. The only ones that had someone there because they had been preparing were the communists. And another little detail, just before my broadcast, the communist man, a man called Petrușcanu, came to the palace with another fellow called an engineer Ceaușu, which was a conspirative name. He turned out to be Bodnaraș, which in fact is Bodnarchuk. That was his real name, I think. And they walked in where I was in the office, white as a sheet in the face. And Petrușcanu just said to me, what have you done? You've ruined us. Those are his words in Romanian. I mean. Well, I was taken aback. What do you mean by ruined us? We've done what we've been talking about, and then you say we've ruined them. Afterwards I understood that if the thing would have happened on the 26th, they were most probably going to do something themselves, the communists. And as we did on the 23rd, that took them by surprise. They weren't ready to do it then. So we won the day, not them.
I read that, and it was ironic that only 1 year after they dismissed you, Petrușcanu was arrested by the communist government, and he was charged that he was a bourgeois nationalist, and he was criticized for cooperating with your coup. They didn't like because you were an obstacle. They wanted to take over the country directly. they would have preferred if some kind of a social revolution would overthrow Antonescu, but the monarchy too. And they kept him in jail for about 3 years, and then in 1954 they executed him. So it was a very ironical end to this man. Well, did he have some, when you dealt with him, did he somehow show nationalism and interest in things Romanian rather than obedience to Stalin?
No, who was this? Is it?
Petrescan.
Oh. Well, Petrescan was a communist, but I think he was much more of a Romanian. I mean, communist Romanian, I don't know. Sometimes you don't know which is which, but anyhow, he, compared to all the others, I think he did have a national feeling, yes. But I just want to continue with this. So Bănăraș and Petrescan had their troops ready. So when I actually left at 2:30 in the morning, afterwards I found out that they took Antonescu from the palace and brought him to the seat of the Communist Party in Bucharest. And later on, when the Russians came, they delivered him to the Russians. Whereas I am accused now that having delivered him to the Russians and having had him shot on purpose. And the fact is that he was taken from the palace and delivered to the Russians without me knowing about it. I only found that out when I came back about 12 odd days afterwards. So this is not a misrepresentation of the facts, it is all on purpose.
Yunitsu once told me, he said that the dramatic feature for you both was when they arrested Antonescu and they heard the door of the safe closing, the slam behind. They knew that you had taken the irrevocable step at that point.
In a way, yes, because that door was a safe, you know, it was nearly 2 feet thick. So when they slammed the thing shut, the whole house shook one moment, you could hear it through the walls.
Stamps for safe too. Let me back up for a little bit, if I might. During the period when you were establishing contacts with the Allies to find ways to get out of the war and break the tie with the Germans, did you have any contacts with Russian forces at all?
No, not directly, no.
Was there any reason for it? Since
well, yes,
that was the front you were on.
we had contact with a Russian representative in Cairo.
In Cairo?
Yes.
Yeah, they were with him there in Cairo.
That yes.
Okay, but not with Moscow or...
Well, it was relayed all the time, of course.
And were they willing to negotiate with you?
Who?
The Russians? Were the Russians willing to negotiate with you?
No, to a certain degree, well, they tried, we mean afterwards?
No, before.
No. Not directly with me, it was with our representatives down there.
In Cairo.
Okay.
In the terms of just bringing in a little bit of a vacancy there, in terms of your political experience, sir, how did you systematically acquire political experience? You had your experience, of course, with Romania, the people, the geography, the history, and the different groupings in Romania. But how did you get this political knowledge? Was it through just education with these people that you were meeting, or were there any systematic studies that you took?
No, not really studies as such. Partly was with the political parties, which of course had their connection.
That was an education in itself.
But then there were lots of other people that we used to meet, and they all used to tell me the same thing, and what the people think and what they were saying, what they were hoping. Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
So by the time we got to the 23rd of August, we were pretty well up to date with what everybody felt and all the population. Oh yes, without that I don't think we could have managed as we did.
I've seen the assertion that, I can't remember where, that Antonescu basically agreed with you, but felt constrained by the commitment he had made, the personal commitment he had made to Hitler. there any basis for that?
No, I don't think I quite understand.
No. I've seen the assertion made in at least one study, I can't remember which one it was, that in 1944, Antonescu agreed with you that they had to get out of the war, but felt that he was bound by a personal commitment to Hitler and didn't know how to handle that.
No, to me, he never admitted that.
You never admit that? Okay.
This went on behind the scenes with the political opposition.
Yeah.
We knew that he said to them and to his close circle that he could certainly not get out of the war without Hitler's permission. Now, this seemed to me
Same thing, yeah.
out of this world. I mean, if he's allied with Hitler, and we see what he's done in other places, how is he going to ask permission to get out of the war and turn his back on him? I mean, that was... and secondly, he had said that as a Romanian officer who had given his word to the Germans to fight, he could not change and betray. In other words, what we all felt was that his promise to the German army or Hitler was above the interest of the country. And that was something none of us could accept.
Yeah. That was the basis of my earlier question, whether the army took a personal oath to the monarch.
But,
Whether the Romanian army normally took a personal oath to the monarch.
well, although Antonescu
Yeah,
commanded the army, I was still head of the army.
I know.
So then when I gave the order, there was no discussion, they obeyed.
Sir, the story that I've always been told was that in simple terms, Antonescu just lacked the resolution to make the hard decision to leave the Nazi coalition. And he was using these arguments that he gave to you as a rationalization for this.
That is, it's very difficult to know exactly what went on in his mind. Apart from these things that I just said, which he's supposed to have said, I don't know. It's difficult to know, really.
No. During this entire period we're talking about, technically speaking, Bulgaria was not at war with Russia until the Russian army actually came in. Did you at any time attempt to use Bulgarian contacts in this respect?
No, absolutely nothing. But we did have no contacts with any of the countries around us for this particular
Only with
thing.
the British and Americans through Cairo and Turkey.
Although we have been accused, or I have been accused,
Yeah.
later on, that it is because of me that the gates of communism were open to Romania, and what happened after is what we know. These people don't want to seem to accept the fact that Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, they fought to the very bitter end against the Soviets, and where did they get them? The same thing. With one difference, that the land of those countries was gone over with like a steamroller. We at least managed to save our territory, so to speak, from being completely destroyed.
During the war, did you have any contacts with the Bulgarian monarchy?
No,
No?
not during the war, no.
Okay.
Just to speculate, if that original proposal to Antonescu to declare an armistice had gone through, what do you think would have happened? What would the Germans then have done?
Well, it's very possible that they would have come in and crushed everything. Because directly after this 23rd of August happened, we know, because we found some telegrams from Hitler telling the army and this ambassador to immediately find a pro-German general and get hold of all of us and shoot the whole lot. And the answer was that there is no such general in Romania.
But they did set up Horia Simu in Vienna as a
yes.
government in exile, right?
That they did.
The day after your
Yes.
coup, yeah. But that had apparently no
that
consequence.
was, I think, you could say the last throes of this thing, because they couldn't have got anywhere.
That's interesting, because in Hungary, when they kidnapped Horthy, they did find Hungarian fascists who took over the
Yeah.
government and fought with the German soldiers.
And then another thing I think should be pointed out is also very important. In a matter of a week or 10 days, we cleared the country by ourselves of all the Germans. We took about 50,000 prisoners from the last soldier to the top officers. So when the Russians came in, they liberated nothing. They just had a nice calm walk all the way through Romania and picked up the arms on the Hungarian border. And something else, and this very few people want to recognize it. In the Nuremberg trials, it was Field Marshal Rundstedt who declared that thanks to what we did in Romania, the war was shortened by at least 6 months. So I mean, I don't want to try to boost ourselves too much, but I mean, this is a fact. The whole Balkan front collapsed.
Sure. Sir, at the time, isn't that one of the reasons why you received from the Russians the Order of Victory? I know at the end in the war, it was Eisenhower, Montgomery, and Tito, and yourself are the 4 recipients, foreign recipients of the Soviet Order of Victory. For this reason, they commented on this fact of your contribution to the war effort.
Yes, that is true. In the citation, they did recognize what I did on the 23rd of August. But on the other hand, my impression was that this was a sort of a bribe.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course.
We give it that, therefore he's going to do our bidding and so on, which turned out to be the opposite. But at the same time, President Truman also recognized the same thing.
The Grand Commander Order of Merit.
How soon after the events of August 44 did those awards?
The Russians came with a very big festivities on, I think it was June or July 1946. And President Truman a little after that.
After that, yeah.
Now, you left Bucharest then after August 23rd.
Yeah.
And when were you able to return then?
Well, we came back about 12 days or 15 days afterwards, make sure that it was calmed down, everything.
And did you then meet with the new government on a regular basis?
Oh, yes. That's another little detail. I remember my mother, when we drove from this place where we were to the station to take the train, it was in the western part of the country, we saw the Russian troops were beginning to trickle in. The first contact, visual contact we had, with 3 of them on horseback. And the one in the middle, I remember him as if it was yesterday. It was a big chunk of a person. I think he must have come from somewhere from the middle of steppes of Asia, because he had his eyes slit. And one of these mustaches like Genghis Khan, you know. And my mother was sitting next to me. She looked at this and said to me, well, if this is the kind of people we're going to have to deal with, we're really going to have some fun. It was sort of prediction in a way.
Can you describe, sir, any of your impressions of any of the German officials or ranking people that you had dealings with during the war? Your estimates of them?
Yeah, well, the Germans, at least, they were more civilized people to look like that. I mean, politically, was another question, but the ones I had to see and meet and all that, they were actually army officers who were a completely different type, as I say. They were civilized people, they were cultured people, they were officers, they were not Nazis. We had 1 or 2 of the real nasty Nazis also there, yes. You couldn't escape that. But the Romanian people and myself and all that, we never really felt very close to them. Although the origin of our family comes from Germany, but that has got nothing to do with it. And the best proof of that was my grandfather in 1916. He declared war against his own country of origin, and that shows his duty towards the country.
Eichmann came to Bucharest, didn't he? Eichmann.
Who?
Adolf Eichmann,
Eichmann.
the Nazi.
So he came from,
Didn't he come to Bucharest during the war?
came to Bucharest to visit. Adolf Eichmann, did he
I don't
visit
think he came to us.
Bucharest?
No.
Okay.
No, we never had in Romania what you call the Gauleiter,
Yeah.
because Antonescu was fulfilling that role.
So essentially, sir, you were living more or less in political isolation, just with the clandestine forces that you knew and some of these overt contacts you had through Antonescu's emissaries, and very little contact with the Germans, as far as
well,
other than official.
They're absolutely strictly necessary, and that was mostly a facade that Antonescu wanted to use me for parades and official occasions and so on, but that's all.
I wondered about the Romanian diplomats. Were they loyal to you? Could you use them for contacts with the Western allies through neutral countries?
The which things, you mean?
The diplomats, the Romanian diplomats.
Oh, no.
No.
Except some of these that went through this man at the Foreign Office that was in charge of the cipher. And if
Possessed.
it happened to be Maniu Brătianu's people, then yes, but from far, otherwise no.
Was Cristiano involved in that from
Well,
Ankara?
Cristiano was already for some
Ankara.
time in Ankara, and he was on our side.
Now then, in this period from 44 to say the end of the war in May 45, what were the major preoccupations and concerns that you had?
Well, then, in 1940, when my father left, I was just about the time I should have started university. And as things turned out, I had other things to worry about at the time. But between all that, I did have a certain number of professors that came for various subjects, so on, but it was very sketchy. I used to go around the country a bit. My mother and myself always had the idea, which we kept to the very end, to be as close as possible to the people. That was very important for us. You know, you get the pulse. You see their faces at least, and they know you, you know them, and so on. That's what we did all through. Politically, of course, I was isolated completely by Antonescu. But physically, we were free to go around as we wanted.
Now, as the months, though, went on toward the end of hostilities, were the Russians at that point beginning to play a role in internal affairs?
Yes, in a way that they toppled all the governments. The first government was, as I said, a purely technical one. When I came back, we reformed the government, which was more of a real government. And then that only lasted about, 3 months, 4 months. And then the communists had already begun organizing themselves upheld by the Russians, of course, because if the Russian army hadn't been there, all of this thing would never have existed. So toppled one government after another, and Petroșcanu actually told me once, you can try what you like. Anna Paco, if you know who Anna Paco was, she was the great head of the Communist Party. She was actually a Russian citizen. She said every week a new government. And she actually, we didn't every week, no, but I mean, every time the government was formed, a week, 10 days after, they started a demonstration. And it went on and on and on. We had to do what we could, change them and all that, until we have the famous time of Wyszynski when he came. This was in end of February, March. Under the pretext that Romania was an unsafe place on the back of the front for the Russian troops, which was absolute nonsense because by then they were already far away. It was just a pretext.
You say she was a Russian citizen. Was she Bessarabian? Is that it? Was she from that part of the...
I don't like using this word, but it's a fact. She was a Jew from Bessarabia, left Romania before even. Well, she had been put in prison for agitation and so on, and she was let go, and she went over to Russia and had her husband denounced to Stalin as a Trotskyite and had him shot. And on that, she was put up in rank. She was number 4 in the Comintern. So she came back to Romania in a Russian uniform.
Her
And of
fate was
course,
such, sir. What was her fate? Wasn't she later on imprisoned? You know,
was an agitator.
yeah, I think she was later on imprisoned.
Was this the first time that a woman had played so important a role in Romanian affairs?
In Romania, yes, perhaps it was, yes.
So, but the governments then that now were formed, they still were coalition governments. In other words, in May 1945, say when hostilities end in Europe, how do you see the situation looking back upon it?
Well, in 1945.
May 45, say VE Day.
In May 45, Wyszynski had already forced on us the communist government. This happened on the 6th of March 45.
March the 6th.
That was about 5 or 6
March
very
6th.
unpleasant days. That's when he started threatening them. The famous thing that I think everybody know by now, when he bashed his fist on my table, and when I refused to give him an answer when he wanted to, he left the room and smashed the door so strong that he cracked the wall, not the plaster, the wall itself. And when he got into the car, he was laughing. So you can see the type. And somebody told me later on that Wyszynski never got angry. It was all put on, that proved it. Anyhow, he had the full backing of Soviet Russia. He had all the army there. He had the commanders, everything. He could do what he wanted.
What was your frame of mind, though, in May 45, 2 months after the communists seemed to have consolidated control?
Well, it wasn't exactly resignation, no, but I mean, we had to face some facts. We never resigned ourselves to the fact that the communists were taking over, but I mean, we were at the mercy of the Russian army. We couldn't have done very much more, but we all considered that here and there certain concessions of minor importance, if possible, was better than having a direct front against them, because you never know, we knew what could have happened. But it would have been better for us, or for me, to be there and try and do what I could than to have a brutal ending of it. So our frame of mind was, I don't know how you can put it, but it was anxiety.
Sir, didn't the Wyszynski, when he had his memorable interview with you that you described, once I was told that, so the phrase that he used was that unless you agreed to the formation of the Groza government, take this list, the so-called Democratic National Front, that he could not guarantee the continued existence of the Romanian state.
Yeah, that's quite a fact. He told me that.
If I recall, that's what I was told.
He told me that. That the existence of Romania as a free and independent state would cease to exist. He did say that.
Were you at this time, well, this is a more complicated question, I suppose, be difficult to answer, but did you get any kind of encouragement from the Western allies?
Well, Yeah, I'm afraid we're coming into a delicate question because all through this, especially this last thing with Wyszynski when he imposed this government on, we were, not just myself, but the opposition parties, we were practically begging on our knees to have some form of support, some form of, I mean, they weren't going to tell us what to do in our own country, but I mean, some form of advice, some word, something. And I'm sorry to say, never anything, nothing came.
Now, we're going to have to ask you some more questions about that.
Yeah.
The turning point, the Cold War, and Romania's role. But we certainly appreciate everything you've been telling us this morning. This has been a wonderful experience for all
I'm
of
very
us.
pleased to be able to explain in some parts, although this is very concentrated.
On behalf of the Living History program at Duke University, it is a pleasure to preside once again at this second session of our interview with King Michael of Romania. And Duke University is very honored by King Michael's presence and his willingness to be interviewed by the panel of historians who are assembled here today. And I would like to introduce Dr. Alex DeGrande of the Department of History at North Carolina State University, and Dr. Roy Melbourne, a former Foreign Service officer who at one point was stationed in Bucharest. And I'm Joel Colton, Professor of History at Duke University. King Michael, if we may go back a bit to some of the things we were talking about, and go back to the time of Yalta, February 1945. Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin sign a statement, which I think was called something like a Declaration on the Liberated Peoples of Eastern Europe, pledging free elections, representative government, constitutional forms of democracy. In your experience, at what point after Yalta were you aware that this was not going to work out that way in Romania?
I would say in the very beginning, no, we were not aware. We were actually believed in this statement by the three Allied powers. And the main thing that was said there was that every country was free to find its own form of government freely. This is the one thing that gave us a certain amount of courage. Only in the following days, of course, when Stalin sent Wyszynski, I don't know how many people know about Wyszynski, he was also called Stalin's butcher, because in, I think it was the second half of the 30s, he sent roughly 30 million people to death. So he was well known for his brutality. Anyhow, he was sent to Bucharest to try and force upon us a purely communist government. Because up to then we managed somehow to have three different governments which were coalition. So he provoked this crisis in actually the end of February and beginning of March 1945. This is rather a long story, but anyhow, I'll try and concentrate as much as I can. He said that the government that was there at the time was unacceptable because there were disturbances the back of the Russian front. This was a whole lot of nonsense because the front was already very far away past Hungary at that time. So this was all artificially made up by him. Anyhow, he forced on me the fact that I had to ask for the resignation of this government and to form something else. Well, constitutionally speaking, I had to consult with the different political factions, opposition and government, and we tried a variety of solutions to sort of try and put off what we expected was going to happen. Well, finally, Wyszynski came after so many visits, and he said that this is unacceptable, it cannot go any longer, and you have to form a government in just a few hours. And that is the famous thing that came out afterwards, because I answered and I said, according to the Yalta agreements, we have the right to choose our own form of government. And there he got really very angry the first time, and he said, here I am Yalta. So, I mean, what can you think of the thing I thought when you hear that, after having seen this agreement? So, in the next 1 or 2 days, I tried again to put off as much as I could. And finally he came and said that the only acceptable person in the view of the Soviet Union is this man Grozov. But on no account am I to tell the Americans and the English about this. That's the way he worked. And I tried whatever I could to put off again until they brought, I better make another parenthesis here, that we were also living under the Armistice Control Commission. And the head of this commission was Marshal Malinovsky, who was commanding troops also. Well, because of my delays, they finally sent him into Bucharest also. And they started parading tanks around the town, a form of pressure. And we had no doubt that they were up to some pretty nasty thoughts if we hadn't complied. So this brings us to the 6th of March, 1945.
Tell us a little bit about Groza. Who
Well,
was he?
Groza was supposedly, if you like, a capitalist type of person because he had properties in Transylvania. He was the head of a very small political formation that was called the Plowers Field, thing which didn't really mean anything. So he was a fellow traveler, really. So I finally had no other solution that I just had to name him as Prime Minister because of all this pressure. And there again, come back to the same thing, that the Western allies were not, it seems now, in a position to give any sort of advice or help at all in this way, so we were left quite alone. And this is in a nutshell what happened on the 6th of March, 1945.
And when Groza was named Prime Minister, what kind of a cabinet did he form?
Well, he came back in a day or two, and I think it was 99% of his people were all communists. So there again, we tried to stall a certain amount during that one day, but there was absolutely nothing we could do. So I just had to sign the papers.
People sometimes ask the question whether the imposition of these pro-Soviet communist governments in Eastern Europe were the result of the Red Army presence or Soviet coercion, or whether there was some kind of popular support for change along these lines, maybe an appreciation of the Soviet effort in the war against Hitler, or perhaps for other reasons. How do you feel about that?
This is a thing that goes back in the breeding of our people. I would say that all through our history, all our troubles, bloodshed and tears has always come from the East. And this has not stopped until today. So I don't think you could say that there was any sort of recognition that anything from the Soviet side. Because after all, we liberated ourselves. They didn't do anything as far as that's concerned. The only help they might have got, let's say, is from the inflated Communist Party, which the Russian army helped build. So we had, as I said the other day, the 400 members of the Communist Party in a population of 20 million. So this is completely alien to our way of thinking and feeling. So there was no really any acceptance of this thing. We just had to bow our head to force.
But by March 1945, and then in the months that followed, the Communist Party membership, I suppose, grew and grew.
Well, of course, it grew artificially because of the Soviet army and the Russian influence, certainly.
Well, then, would you, and any other members of the panel will come in with other questions, but would you go ahead and tell us a little more then of the events following March 45 and really moving on up to your forced abdication?
Yeah. Just the immediate months following this 6th of March 43 were more or less uneventful, relatively quiet, while they organized themselves on the hand all the time, as the usual procedure. From March until August is this calm. And then the United States, I think Britain endorsed it as well, gave out, I would say, a communique in a way that United States and Britain were not prepared to sign a peace treaty with Romania until it had a representative and democratic government, which it did not consider the Groza government as such. Well, this gave me an opportunity to try and do something. So I drew up a document explaining, and I called the deputy of Marshal Malinowski, a general called Susaikov, and put in front of him this situation. I'm sorry, I'm jumping. First, I called Groza himself. Put him in front of this situation, and I said, will you please resign to help me to form a real broad-based government. This was in my constitutional prerogatives, whereupon he refused. Now this meant, constitutionally speaking, conflict between the country and myself. So in facing this situation, I drew up this document and called General Susaikov, and at the same time I had two documents sent to the British mission and the American mission, explaining the situation. And to Susaikov I said, well, this is how the thing is, now it's up to you to fix it. Whereupon he nearly collapsed, if I could say, because he never expected that we would do a thing like that. 1 or 2 days later he came back, furious, with news from Moscow, saying that this is considered by the Soviet government as a hostile and unfriendly act against them. Well, what am I going to do about it? You know, in situations like this, you get to a point where you don't really care much what is going to happen after, because you knew you had to do something and say something. So very briefly, I just said to him, well, I'm very sorry, then that's it. Well, of course, he got more and more furious. He left. I came back, a telephone next morning, which was the 23rd of August. That's 1 year after our coup. At 6 o'clock in the morning, you want to come and see me? So I said, no, it's 7. And he said, this is hostile, the same old story again. And that they insist that I should come to the celebrations of the 23rd of August. So I said, I'm very sorry, I'm not going to have anything more to do with this government until this situation is fixed. Goodbye and finished. And on that I went up to our summer residence, and that's where I stayed until the end of the year, refusing to have anything more to do with the government. I didn't sign any laws or anything.
Was that the period that the
And this is-
historians
yes.
call a royal strike?
This is what is called a royal strike, because I went on strike regarding the government, yes. Finally, there were a few things between, because on my birthday, for instance, General Susaikov sent his interpreter up to our county summer residence in Sinai with all sorts of presents and vodkas and things like that, which we didn't appreciate anyhow. But anyhow, he sent that there to sort of probably to try and make things a little better, but there was nothing to make better. I mean, my decision was as I took it, and that was that. Then towards the end of the 45, there was some arrangements being made, I think, between Washington, London, and Moscow, whereupon there was going to be a commission to be sent down to Bucharest to fix the situation. And the commission consisted again of Wyszynski, the American ambassador, Mr. Harriman, and the British ambassador, Sir Archibald Clark Kerr at the time. And they did come down to Bucharest. And the decision that came out of this was that we should organize immediately free elections, and that they should include just 2 members of the opposition parties. Now, in private talks I had with Mr. Harriman and Sir Archibald Clark Kerr, I said, do what you like, but for God's sake, do not insist on these elections, because we know what's going to happen. Anyhow, I couldn't get them out other than personally, perhaps they understood, but it didn't work. And on one of our sessions, very cynically, Wyszynski answered, because I said, now who is going to see that this is implemented? And he with a smile on his face turned, I said, but we are here for this. So I said, but you're going away, and what happens after that? He said, never mind, we'll see to it that it does all right. Anyhow. So by the end of 1946, the elections were organized and held. And this might sound ridiculous today, but at the time it was not at all funny. The opposition got between 70 and 85% of the votes. And what came out afterwards was over 80% for the communists. We found out afterwards that the ballot boxes were already prepared before, and during the night with the communist guys, they just switched boxes, and that was that. And that, unfortunately, is exactly what I had predicted and all the other opposition parties.
Were you able to communicate that to, let's say, the United States, Britain?
I don't even think it was necessary for me to do that, because they knew that pretty well what happened. And there's another incident I heard much later, I'm not sure if it was an American diplomat or British, asked Stalin in Moscow, what will happen if the opposition wins the election? And Stalin is supposed to have answered, don't worry, the government will have over 80%. What more can I say?
The reason I was interested in that is that in some of the Eastern European countries, they excluded many people from the ballot, from being able to vote or run for office on the grounds of having been collaborators and so forth. But here you feel it was more a matter of stuffing the ballot boxes. It's interesting. Alex, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I did. I'd like to go back a little bit in time, just to a few months before your question started. In October 1944, Winston Churchill visited Moscow and made an arrangement with Stalin, the famous partition of spheres of influence. And Romania was put, I think, roughly 90% in the Soviet sphere. When did you find out about that agreement, and what was your reaction to it?
Find out exactly as these percentages were put down, I'm afraid, very much later.
Much later, I imagine.
What shall I say? Our reaction was incredulity. I mean, we couldn't imagine that such a thing would happen, especially from the Western Allies.
Because it was just a month, really, after you
no, it
had...
was even a little longer than that.
Well, it was a month, a few months before Yalta, and it...
Yes.
It certainly... did you have any indication from the British or American government during the armistice negotiations that they would be involved in Romania or take a greater role than they had previously?
No indication directly from the Western Allies, but in practice it became more and more obvious that the leading powers in all this thing was going to be the Soviet Union. That yes.
What struck me as I was thinking about this were the parallels between the situation of the House of Savoy in Italy and your situation in Romania, which was played out exactly 1 year later. Did you do any thinking about at the time, about the situation that had been worked out in Italy and
no, not really, because Italy had the United States and Britain was in there, and our front was still a little bit further away from our country at the time. So no, I can't say that we thought of, let's say, copying the same situation, no. What had to be done in Romania was a strictly Romanian thing, and we had to do what we did, and that was all.
Could you tell me a little bit about General Sănterescu?
Sănterescu, I mean.
Yes, yes, I'm sorry.
Well, he was the head of my military household, and we had discussions before the 23rd of August, including him. And it was decided that day that he should become the Prime Minister. And he was a cavalry officer, he was a decent person. Maybe he wasn't a great fighter, if you like, but being a decent man and understanding the situation, that's why we chose him.
Was there any possibility of a civilian government at that time, or were there any civilian leaders that you might have gone to? Your next man was General Radescu.
Radescu. No, at that time, no, because this was a purely military operation. So there had to be military people there to get the whole situation in hand on the 23rd of August and the following few days. The political part came after on the second government, then yes.
Could you explain some of your relations with the National Peasant Party and the National Liberal Party in that period with, say, Bratianu and Maniu and the old leadership?
Yeah. The relations with me were very close. I mean, we didn't meet that often because it was dangerous for them. But we had connections, well, this goes back to the 42. And we were in constant contact, exchanging views and information. Of course, during 43 and 44, these meetings became more often. And we had excellent relationships between them and me. And that kept on until the very end.
But they were quite old at the time. Was there any potential leadership that you could have looked to?
No, apart from them, no, because they were the backbone of the, let's say, the political backbone of the country. And they'd proved themselves politically already for a long, long time back, going back to even before the 20s. So they were the backbones.
Did you have contact in a durable way with the Socialist Party?
Up to the time until we were forced to take them in the group, no. Neither the communists nor the socialists, because they were insignificant from a political point of view in Romania.
Very small.
In this period of time, was this the? Did Antonescu come to a public trial in Romania?
Yes, well.
And was it in this period?
This is another, as I say, unfortunate situation because, as I said before, the small group of communists that came to the palace on 23rd of August, they took him without my knowledge and brought him to the Communist Party headquarters, even if it was clandestine, but it was still headquarters. And when the first Russian troops, the general came in, they promptly delivered him to the Russians while I was away. And the Russians took him and brought him near Moscow, one of their famous prisons, I think, called the Lubyanka, or Ljubljana. As far as I know, they treated him fairly well. But they kept him there for a year and a half. So during that year and a half, things were getting worse at home. Groza got there, all that communist administration. So I am convinced that they did this to be able to show that it was much better under Antonescu than then. And when his trial came on, to put me on the spot, not to be able to commute his sentence, so as to give the impression of the Romanian population that I was trying to do something which they already had seen, the difference in the situation. But it didn't work, although it put me in a very, very difficult situation, because there were 5 people condemned to death. I managed to change the sentences, I think it was 2 or 3. And I was doing every single thing I could to change the sentence of the Marshal Antonescu and the other Antonescu. And this I had a certain time of discussions, several days, whereupon again we had the Russian intervention in the form of tanks and other types of pressure and so on. Now, this whole situation, I think, should be put as far as possible in the context of those times, because now it's very easy to say you could have done this, you could have done that. But when you had that form of pressure, military pressure, political pressure, moral pressure, it is very difficult. You know, now it's easy, but I was put in such a situation that it was impossible to do anything else. And I think that the majority of the population in Romania realized this. Mm-hmm. And anyhow, the Western Allies, they knew very well what was going on.
I would say, Joe, that now that looking at it from the standpoint of His Majesty's comments about the development of the Groza government and so forth, that we have to look at the American perspective at this time. And the American perspective, as I saw it then, to elaborate on what he has mentioned, is that the Americans considered that this was really the Yalta Agreement was valid, and that the Yalta Agreement superseded any sort of wartime agreement, such as the 90-10% ratio that you mentioned earlier, because the Yalta Agreement and the American concept of, with our great interests in Eastern Europe, based upon the millions of Eastern Europeans who were American citizens from Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. There were millions of Eastern Europeans who were American citizens. We had a strong, substantial interest in Eastern Europe based upon our domestic politics alone. So that we approached it from the standpoint of the values of the war. And this apparently may sound naive today, but at that time it was very, very strong, a natural concomitant of American actions and activities in Romania. I think His Majesty may very well know this. So that when the Groza government came in, it came at the time we had mentioned to His Majesty earlier the comments that had been made by President Truman when he came back from Potsdam, in which he had told the American public, very publicly in a speech, that he was going to oppose the imposition of governments that were not made with the consent of the governed. And made a speech on August the 9th in this country. We got a copy of that speech and instructions on August the 11th. On August the 12th, I delivered the contents of that with the comments of the American government to His Majesty at Sinaia. And the events from leading up to leading up to the installation of the constitutional strike started thereafter, because His Majesty and the Romanians saw that here were the Americans who were adamantly opposed to this new imposition of a communist regime in Romania. And unfortunately, the British at that time were not, as we know, they were powerless to do anything, and they told Your Majesty, if I recall, sir, that you were going to take such action at your own risk.
Yeah.
You were going to take such action at your own risk, because they could do nothing. But the Americans took the opposite position. So that came to the constitutional crisis that we have elaborated here in this discussion. So when you come down to it, the question of American perspective at that time, I think is important to raise. This reason I'm doing it now, Joel, because we considered that the troublesome thing was that the Americans and Western governments had a certain ethical basis. As an old friend of mine said, what troubled me at the time, he said, was the fact that we have no common ethical basis with the Russians. And he said, that's going to cause us problems when the war is over. And these comments that I'm making show this bias, this predilection on the part of the United States, and the fact that we had recognized that it was not feasible to organize a cooperative arrangement with the Russians at that point on these issues, because we had no meeting ground with them. So I always date the start of the Cold War from March the 6th as the start of the Cold War. And in fact, from then on, the Americans were preoccupied with the whole question of the Cold War and relationships with Russia and the United States and Britain.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'm sorry. Your the strike that you had, the royal strike, lasted really the balance of 1945 then. In 1946, and especially in 1947, how much royal prerogative and room for political maneuver did you have after that?
Yes,
When you came back,
yeah.
say.
On paper, theoretically, it was the same thing. Of course, after the elections of 1946, things started going from bad to worse from that point of view, because they wouldn't listen to me anymore. They wouldn't take into consideration any of my objections or anything I tried to do. So I slowly was sort of losing my power of action, and constitutionally speaking. Physically, I was free. I could go around. I could do what I liked. But from a constitutional point of view, it was getting more and more difficult. We felt that very strongly.
You were very courageous to stay, I think, and especially after the wedding between Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth at that time. But what was it?
Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't sure whether it was Queen Elizabeth at that moment. But why do you think the Soviet government and why do you think the Grozia government allowed you to stay in power in 1947? And why did they let you come back when you left?
Well, I think my impression was, and still is, that because of this, let's say, rearguard fight I was putting up against the communist takeover, the whole population of the country knew what I was doing, and I think my popularity was very, very big at the time, and everybody was for me. So they didn't quite dare do something too rash, let's say, because they were afraid that something else might have happened in the country. I think that's why they sort of tolerated the situation.
Did they try to undermine your popularity as the year went on?
Oh yes, that was going on all the time.
How did they do that?
Well, through insidious things and lies, and then doing different things like laws that they forced me to sign, which were against our wish and against what the people felt. But still, it didn't work. It didn't work up to the very last moment.
Did they expect you to come back to the country when you went to London?
No. But, well, that's another bit of a story, because when I got the invitation to go to the present Queen's wedding from King George, of course, for such an important thing, I had to consult the government and let them know. So Grozia, when he heard this thing, well, he's usually, when there was an important thing like this, he said, oh, I have to think about it and consult my colleagues. In this particular case, he jumped to it, and he said, you must go. Whatever it is, you might give the impression that you're a prisoner here. So that's how the approvals, if I could say that, happened, that I could go. Not only that, but they said, please take anything you want, feel yourself comfortable, this, that, all sorts of nonsense in that sense. So that's it. So then they let me go, and we left by air at the airport. The whole government was there. Big smiles on their faces, as warm as they could possibly be, shaking hands with both hands, and all sorts of, put on sort of theatrical things. So we left. In London, I met my wife. So on our way back to Romania, we stopped in Switzerland again, and she came with us, and that's where we got engaged. This was in December. Again, according to rules, I had to tell the government about this because the head of state getting married is a state business, it's not private. So I sent Marshal of the Court, Mr. Nigel, that you probably remember, to tell Groza about the situation. The answer came back, no. Because it would be too expensive, because the country can't afford I don't know what, all sorts of things like that. Whereas I answered that it's not absolutely necessary to have a wedding in Romania, and then I could look after that myself and so on. Anyhow, the answer was still no. So on this, anyhow, we decided to go back. We went back by train. Now, the reception I got at the station, the same government was there. It was icy. Not a smile, a shake hands was sort of just because they felt they had to, but they didn't feel it. So that made us think a little later on that this refusal to get married was done on purpose, so as to be able to make me not come back and then blame me to say that for a question of love, I renounced my duty to the country. You know, they're very tricky in this way. They try to put all sorts of things over, but it didn't work. And then we had heard in the meantime that Tito had been to Bucharest on a semi-official visit. And that was also something which is not at all done. When the head of state is out of the country, you don't invite another head of state to come for an official visit. There were all sorts of little signs of that kind that made one think that there's something's up. Another thing was we had heard that they were going to bring in front of me the change of constitution, and that was going to be in April of next year. Now, to change the constitution meant nothing else but the change of form of state. That's what we realized that. Now, why exactly they did what they did in the end of December and before, I'm not very clear myself yet. But anyhow, that's how it happened.
Did you have the feeling, obviously Groza was not the major force in that government, or did you have a feeling that he had to, you dealt with him mainly during the period, did you have a sense of who was, what constraints he was working under, and
Oh yes, that we're quite convinced that he was working on the orders from Moscow. How they actually managed to get him to do these things is also a question we're not very clear on, but who knows, maybe they had something they were blackmailing him with, because that's how they usually work. The force in the government were actually this man Bodnarash, which we talked about yesterday, Anna Parker, who was actually became Minister of Foreign Affairs. They were the leading power.
Gheorghe Dej
Gheorghe Dej was the secretary of
the party
Communist Party at that time.
was not a member of the government.
Oh yes, he was. He was Minister of Transport,
Minister of
doing
Transport.
other things than being Minister of Transport. So it's all this small group of people, they were actually the leaders of the government. Groza was just a facade and a fellow traveler.
Were the, what I was wondering was, were there more pressures from inside? How would you judge the balance between the pressures that came from Moscow and the pressures that came from the Romanian Communist Party?
That was Moscow's channel to do what they wanted to have done in Romania through these people.
And they acted
Yes.
purely, they had no interest that you saw that they were promoting themselves. I mean,
Well, you know, this is something else that I don't know how much is understood in the West, that members of the Communist Party, do not have the country at heart. It has proved itself over and over again and all over the world. They just follow the party line and that's it. They don't care what happens around that, and this is exactly what we had gone through in Romania, right up to the end. It's something.
Were they transforming the country?
Oh
at
yes,
same
all the time.
The
Because,
economy, for example?
for instance, the mayors and prefects in the country, there were a whole lot were taken out, changed, and their men were put back. They ignored completely the system that was done before. They just changed them. And the officers, the loyal officers to me and the army, they had forced me to put them out on all sorts of pretexts. So in fact, when we come to the 30th of December, 47, the army was in no position anymore to do anything. And I've mentioned this before, but from all the prisoners of war, not all, but a lot of the prisoners of war that were taken in Russia, Anna Parker was the principal organizer of two divisions which were indoctrinated in the communist ways, and they brought them back to Romania. And one of those divisions, members of the division, were the ones that encircled our house on the 30th of December.
What I was interested in, too, though, were they socializing the economy, the collectivizing land?
Yes, although they couldn't go quite as fast as they wanted to because I was putting up this rearguard fight. But they were to a very great degree, and then they made these mixed companies, Russian-Romanian, and the Russians had the majority, and then there were air transport, oil companies, banks, all sorts of things like that. In that sense, they were socializing, yes.
Did you ever visualize, this is hard to answer, that you could have a Soviet system, communist system in Romania with the monarchy?
Yes. Of course, it's not compatible. That's quite true. But they kept this situation going, I think, just because what I said before. They didn't take things too quick because of my popularity in Romania.
I suppose another way of asking the question is, when did you realize that things were going to reach a pass where they would act against you?
It's difficult to say exactly, but you felt this sort of circle coming closer and closer and closer. We never quite knew exactly when it was going to happen, but we did feel that we were really prisoners.
Did you get it? Oh, I'm sorry. Please, aye.
Sir, did you ever notice any at that time, or toward the latter part of the period before you left Romania, the emergence of any sort of schisms between the communists, between what I call the national communists and the Kremlin communists, such as Tito later exemplified, and the resulted purges by the Russians of all the communist parties in Eastern Europe? Did you see any sign of that in Romania?
Well, there was some, yes. Even Petroscano, I think, being more of a nationalist,
That's what I meant. National
more
communist,
of
I
a
call it.
Romanian, let's say, than the others. Then you had a distinct split in the Social Democrat Party, because you had the leader, Dieter Petrescu, who was a decent man, more of an old-fashioned politician, but a decent man, and these very progressive type were there, and the communists managed to split the party in two, yes.
Because there was not, in your definition, there was not any clear distinction between some of the communist leaders being national communists and against the Kremlin crowd, such as you indicated that Bodnarash and Anna Pauker represented. You didn't see that as much.
Well, yes, because Bodnarash was the real Russian tool.
That's right.
He was even, I think, either Bulgarian or Russian origin, because his real name was Bodnarchuk. He was a lieutenant in the artillery troops in Romania, and he deserted and went to Russia. And then he came back with them, so you can see the time.
Did you have any direct relations with, say, Anna Pauker, or?
Well, I had to, as when they became ministers. This was a working relationship with the government.
What kind of
But
person?
that's about all.
How did you judge them? I mean, personally.
Well, how shall I say? We had every time I knew that these people were coming, I had a very unpleasant feeling, to say the least, because we realized who they were and what they were after, yes. So it was certainly not on very, very warm terms.
What were your relationships with Manu during this period where it was very
Well,
troublesome?
Manu, before I went to England, of course, the same relations as always, very warm. The only difficulty I had with him, if you can call it a difficulty, because he had very good ideas of what should be done and what we all wanted to do. But what I was trying to ask him is to give me some practical solutions, because it's all very well to say, do this, do that, the other. When you have the Russian troops and tanks and things, it's not the same thing. And that was a little more of a difficult situation, but relationship otherwise with him were excellent. And Bratiano, the same thing.
The historian Fisher Galati made a point at a in one of his books that during the first government after the armistice, he thought that there was some time lost by the old parties and the old politicians in their inability to move towards reforms more quickly. This would be in the first government that you formed after the armistice. Did you feel that the older parties were prepared and there was time lost? Could there have been more reforms from your first government?
I can't say there was too much time lost, because it was this rear guard fight that we were putting up all the time. See, it's perhaps quite true that the old parties, still thought in terms of normal times. And sometimes perhaps it was necessary to do things a little quicker, but the actual slowness of it was because of this rear guard fight.
I think he was thinking in terms of land reform and
Well,
other things that.
The land reform that happened under the Groza government was not justified, because the real one was done by my grandfather in 1925 or 26, where he gave the great majority of land to the people that fought for our independence and won the war. So what was left was really not justified to cut that up still further and give it. This was just a question of propaganda for votes.
In 1946, the American government in the fall sent, under Secretary Burns, sent a representative to Romania and also to Bulgaria to look and estimate, given his unbiased evaluation of the situation there for the American government. And that was Mr. Etheridge. Did you see Mr. Etheridge? What did you think of him at the time? What did you think of that effort?
Of who?
Mr. Etheridge.
Oh. Well, I did see him. I think he was very honest in the way he went about trying to find out things, because he saw everybody, as much as he could. And the impression I had about him was that he really did understand the situation, and he was going to make a pretty strong report, which I think actually happened. In that sense, we're very grateful that he did come there. Well, unfortunately, nothing came out of it.
That's right. Then in 1947, the congressional delegation came from the United States of senators such as Senator Barkley, Senator Hatch, Senator Hickenlooper, Senator Smith, who was the chairman, and Representative Munt and Representative Lodge of Connecticut, about a dozen in all. They came to look at the situation in Eastern Europe. What would you think at that time? Do you think that effort was useful?
Well, I think it comes into the same sort of thing as Etheridge, because they come to inform themselves and find out as much as they could the truth, and then go back and report. And we were all very happy that these people came, yes.
This was sort of a process of education of the American public.
Yes.
changing course, so to speak, after the wartime years?
Well, you know, after this, we realized certain things. At the time, we got so involved in all this. But what I heard also from my wife, because she used to work in New York before joining the French army, the propaganda that was going on in the United States about the Soviet Union, the great allies, the great people that suffered, the great history, it was very difficult psychologically to switch from one moment to the other, to start realizing that who you believe were the great allies and that were doing what they were doing. So all these people that came there was a great help to try and start moving the opinion. It was very difficult.
Well, of course, it was true. They had lost 20 million lives in the war, the Soviet Union, and people felt that, well, these were the kinds of allied lives in numbers that we were spared. So there was that feeling, there's no doubt about it. But we were, officially at least, tightening our stand and being firmer with the Soviet Union. The Truman Doctrine, for example, really clearly announcing that if certain countries were undermined from within or attacked from without, that we would come to their aid. And then, of course, the attempt to build up Western Europe, and then, of course, the attempt to stand up to the Russians in Germany. But I suppose that that kind of Iron Curtain idea of Churchill's, no matter when he proclaimed it, early or not, it still was saying that the Soviets were going to have a freer hand in Eastern Europe. It was sort of their security zone. And the peoples of Eastern Europe suffered as a result. Well, we'd be very much interested in having your description of the events that really led to your enforced abdication. Was that the last day of December?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, as I said, we came back from our trip to London, and we went up to our summer residence, where we always used to go for winter also with my mother. This was in the, I think, second week of December. And I was already preparing my New Year's, not speech exactly, but my message to the people. This was a traditional thing that's been going on for years. And on the 29th of December, the Marshal of the Court calls me up on the telephone and says that Groza wants to see me urgently in Bucharest, together with my mother, which was already unusual, to discuss a family affair. Now, in those circumstances, a family affair seemed to us to be the only question about my forthcoming marriage. So next day, the 30th of December, we went down. We arrived in Bucharest around 11 o'clock, or 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. And Groza arrives with Gheorghiu Dej, which was again very unusual because the Prime Minister always came by himself. So we received him together with my mother. And Groza had a very misplaced sense of humor, we could say it, among other things. Because with a great smile on his face and joy like that, he says, we've come to discuss about an amiable divorce. No, taken a little bit aback. What was a divorce? What you talking about? So what? Well, he said, the moment has come where there's difficulty in the countries and the monarchy does not exactly have its place anymore. That's when we understood what he was up to. So when, look at him like that, and he fished out of his briefcase this declaration and put it down on the table under my nose. So very quickly I sort of glanced through it and I saw what this whole thing was about. I started to argue in the sense that this is not for him or the government to decide on things like that. If it's the question of abdication and going, it's for the people. Because after all, it's the people who plebiscited the town, brought the monarchy, our family's monarchy, and it's for them to decide. So it's, we have no time for this. The thing is much too quick and so. So I said, well, let me at least read the thing quietly. So I went out, went to my little office, and called up the Marshal of the Court and my secretary, Mr. Onichu, who was in the house. And when they came up, they said, our telephones are cut, the guards have been arrested and replaced by different troops, and there's a second circle around the house with artillery pointing on the house.
King Michael, may I interrupt? At this critical psychological moment, our tape has closed down. Let's pick up at this very moment after a break.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
First hour.
Please continue, King Michael, with the dramatic events of the last day of December or so of 1947.
Shall I continue now when I took this document that Groza put in front of me to my office to read it, the Marshal of the Court and my secretary, I called them up and they told me that the telephones have been cut, the guards have been arrested and replaced by communist troops, and another circle around the country, around the house, with artillery pointed on the house. So we just read this thing in peace, but there was not much more to discover in it. So I finally went back to the sitting room where my mother was with these two people. I tried to argue whatever I could about my duty to the country, the people have to decide, and we can't just give up like that so easily. They brought all sorts of arguments, and finally they started threatening. They said they have a whole dossier on me with all my relationship with the United States and Britain. Anyhow, all that thing counted nothing at all for me because that was not the point. But then they came out with something else, which was pure blackmail, saying that the over 1,000 young people, students, who had been arrested during the, I'd say 45, 6, 7, someone is going to get wind of what is going on here if I go on too long, and these people are going to start agitating, and they are not be obliged to, but they are going to kill them all, have to shoot them, execute them. And by what I had seen in the last months, this was no bluff. They really meant the business. And that is something that I could absolutely not take the responsibility that just for me and to keep this going, that I should have these people killed and a bloodbath because of me. The rest of the blackmail didn't come into it, but this was the main thing that I could not accept. So there was really nothing else for me to do but to sign this paper. That's how it happened.
Mm-hmm.
What did the paper state? It was an abdication, or what was the document?
Yes, but they put a whole lot of other things in there. It was even written in a pretty bad Romanian, mistakes and so on. Yes, abdication ended up with the word of that, saying that I realized that monarchy is old-fashioned, that it's not anymore valid for Romania, that it is an impediment for the social progress of the country. You imagine the way they put these things, you know. That's just in a nutshell, I mean, what it is. But that's about it.
What time were you given? What facilities, what arrangements were you able to take many things with you? Or?
Yes, so after this thing happened, they left, and we went back to Sinai up in the mountains with my mother. And once we got there, we saw that even there the guards had been replaced. And not only that, but there was a commission sent by the Groza people in the house. And during the 3 or 4 days that we were there preparing to leave and making our luggage, they followed my mother in every single room. They didn't do that to me, but they did that to her. She wasn't even allowed to take an ashtray off the table. And the second commission in the big house of the palace, where one of my people had to make the inventory of every single thing that was there. And on top of that, just before leaving, they opened up every single suitcase we had to see that we didn't sort of sneak something in there. So the story that they have been giving out in the country all these years, and it still go on now, saying that I left with trainloads of gold and God knows what, and money, and so that, I mean, even if we would have liked to take something physically, it was absolutely impossible with those people there looking through all the luggage. It's another one of their methods of disinforming, which in fact are lies.
Did they make any kind of financial settlement?
No. Groza with his peculiar sense of humor. Yes, I forgot another incident to say, which was, I don't know if it's significant or not, but after I signed this paper, he turned around to me and said, "Feel," and he produced his pocket at me like that. So I put my hand in the pocket, he had a pistol in it. So the Prime Minister comes with a pistol in his pocket to me and turns around with a big smile on his face to my mother and tells her in German, I understood that, he said, so that it shouldn't happen to me what happened to Antonescu. That's his type of sense of humor.
Yes.
And then he also told her not to worry, because they will not let me die in the shades of the pyramids. Now that was an allusion to the King of Italy, the old King of Italy who had to leave. He went to Egypt, I believe. Anyhow, I didn't do any of this negotiating with that, but some of my people did. He said, all right, we leave, but what are we going to live on? So the idea was that, it's getting a bit involved with other things, because we had certain state properties which were administered by the palace, and that was to complete the civil list. So we had asked that they should give me the equivalent of the products of these state properties during the year of 1947. Whereupon the answer was that they couldn't do that because Romania doesn't have foreign currency, or they're going to study the question, they're going to see later on, and so on. So we need something. So the bare facts are, they gave us cash, 200,000 Swiss francs and $50,000. And that is the great fortune that we're supposed to have taken with us. Luckily enough, my mother had a little bit of money left over from before the war in England, but that's about all we had.
Then where did you go directly
So,
after these events?
From Romania, we went by train. We came straight to Switzerland, to Lausanne. And here's a small incident which was very touching in a way. especially for my mother, because she was in such a tense situation. We left the evening of January the 3rd, and we went through the rest of Romania, we went through Hungary, and we finally arrived at the Austrian border. And the train stops on a bridge. We knew it was a bridge because the water was running out. We had the blinds pulled. So my mother just looked at me. You know, we're still in the Russian zone. You know, sort of an inquiring look at me and says, now what? You know, we couldn't be quite sure what was going to happen. We stayed there about 10 minutes, and then the train moved on and stopped again. And then I heard a jeep coming up, because I happened to know the sound of the jeep. It came up, brakes creased in front of our wagon. The door was flung open, and in walks a young American officer, a lieutenant. That was a really sort of gripping moment, because he looked at me and saluted and said, "Now you're free." You know, sort of. And my mother nearly collapsed, you know, because, and then he went out, and then we left and arrived in Lausanne. We stayed there for a few days. I could not make any declaration whatsoever because of the Swiss neutrality, their way of doing things. We managed to take a few days off in the mountains, you know, to sort of clear one's mind. My fiancée then joined me. And then we decided that the right thing to do at that moment was to go to the United States to try and explain a bit what happened. So we stopped in London, and that was the first place where I could make a public declaration with a small press conference. So then we left. When we arrived in New York, this was my first encounter with the American press, which was a little bit difficult because I'm not used to this. About 200 of them came on the Queen Elizabeth, shooting all sorts of questions that, you know, was taken a little bit aback. But in 1948, you could still see the Russian influence, because when we got off the boat in the docks in New York, the first thing I saw was a whole lot of hundreds of people milling around there, and they had posters up like this saying, "Send Michael back before he sends our boys to war." Now, what point was this thing? See, because I should imagine some influence went on there that imagined that I was going to come to the United States and get the government or the president involved in something to make a war to Russia to get me back. I imagine. I mean, it's so stupid it can't even go through your mind, but that's what I saw there. So I was invited at the Overseas Press Club at the Waldorf, and that's where I made a fairly long speech with a declaration with a little more details about what happened. And we stayed in the United States about 3 weeks.
You went to Washington also.
I went to Washington. I managed to see President Truman. I mean, what can you say in 10 minutes? But anyhow, I explained a little bit. I thanked him for what he was trying to do and for the fact that he gave me the Legion of Merit. And that was about it.
Did he, of course he was very busy with many other things, but did he ever know about that famous memorandum that Stettinius, I think, had sent, saying that President Roosevelt and he were unable to respond to requests for help because of the delicacy of relations with the Soviets?
I really don't know if he knew that, but this memorandum you mentioned, I sent to President Roosevelt in January 1945. This was 3-4 months after our coup, after the Russians had come there. We had already started suffering under this Russian presence. So I sent a letter to the president, plus this memorandum of about 30-odd pages, explaining exactly what was going on. The only thing I know is what that it didn't go down very well. And now I have received some copies of various correspondence going on. I believe it was Mr. Stettinius, he was the Secretary of State. President Roosevelt sent a small note to him asking him to prepare a reply to me. And in one of these papers was that Stettinius said that it is not deemed advisable to give King Michael an answer, especially in view of the tone of the memorandum, when we are trying to arrange things with the Russians and so on with the situation in Romania. But I only received this thing a few months ago. So we see all the involvement of things.
You know,
very
King Michael, I
different.
was just thinking for a moment that it wasn't a reflection on you that those people were gathered there demonstrating, even though it was your visit that was precipitating it. But there was a great fear in the United States that there were people who wanted to take so firm a stand against the Soviets. And of course, the Berlin airlift was taking place at this time, that it might lead to a war with the Soviet Union. And we'd all been through this dreadful war and didn't want it. So there was this kind of deep-seated peace movement. The president of the vice president of the United States was, in a sense, a spokesman for that kind of sentiment. Henry Wallace, you know, at one point. So, I mean, it wasn't a personal reflection on you, that particular slogan.
No, I don't think
can
that,
see.
but it still was a bit of a shock when you see
I can
this,
imagine.
you know, after, especially my mother, after what we'd just been going through.
Yes.
And then you see this,
Sure.
you know, but I mean, we didn't have any influence on us. So.
Then you went back to
We
Switzerland,
came back to Switzerland then.
and there you have settled over the years, haven't you?
Well, then of course we had to start thinking about our future. And my mother had a house in Florence in Italy since already 1932. We're very lucky to have this. We went there a few times, and then we finally decided on our marriage. There you have another situation which is awkward. Because the question was, where should we get married and the minimum of proper conditions. So, you know, you have an expression here, I think in America, you say that someone's like a hot potato for some, you know. I'm afraid that's what we were at the time, because wherever we tried to get to do something, it didn't work. It would have been bad, it would have been this, it would have been something else. So finally, my mother's brother, King Paul of Greece, who was a very exceptional person, because he tried very much to keep the family together. For him, the family was very, very important. So my mother told him what was going on, so then he said, well, if that's the case, you come here to us and I'll give you the wedding. So that resolved one problem. Mm-hmm. So in June we went down to Athens and he arranged the whole thing officially. The whole Greek government was there, and I mean it was done properly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A very small incident, whether it's important or not, I don't know, but it just shows a little bit the situation. We flew from Switzerland to Athens for this occasion. And King Paul's mentality was that, an idea was that what happened in Romania was not legal, and that he was going to treat me as everybody else should be treated. So when we arrived there, he had a small company of soldiers, we give the honors, But they let the captain of the aeroplane know that all the passengers should wait until further notice in the aeroplane. So when the aeroplane finally stopped, one of the officials came in and came straight to us and took us out. And then there was a little ceremony there, and then we went off. The next thing I saw was in one of the American newspapers, I don't remember exactly which. There was a newspaperman that happened to be in that aeroplane. And something, I would say, this little procedure that my uncle did for us rubbed him up the wrong way. Because in the article was said that what happened and so on, and then he was looking out the window and saw a puppet show going on. And so that's about all he could understand of what the uncle was trying to do for me. You know? Anyhow, that's just an incident. So from this point on, we had to really think what are we going to do, because
Let me interrupt for 1 second. Professor DeGrande had a question going back to the earlier period that he wanted to ask about the Marshall Plan, right?
Well, it was just a question. I didn't know how much you followed the events going on in the government during 1947, but it occurred to me that both Czechoslovakia and Hungary accepted initially the Marshall Plan idea. And I know there was a conference in the summer of 1947. Was there any discussion that you knew of in the Romanian government dealing with that? Any debate that went on at the time that you might not have?
no, there was nothing about the Marshall Plan in Romania, but there were other incidents where, for instance, UNRWA and the Red Cross, I believe it was 46, we had a very bad typhus epidemic up in Moldavia. And they offered to come and help with medicines and so on. The government refused. Wouldn't have anything to do with them. They let those people die just for what they have, I don't know,
Politics.
Americans ordered to come and see what was going on. But Marshall Plan as such, no.
You, as head of state, I know Victor Emmanuel had the right to consult with ministers on a regular basis. You lost those rights during 1946 and 47, I take it, completely. I mean, you could not follow the day-to-day events of the government by calling a minister in and talking to them. That power was suspended, I take it.
Well, while I was there, that was in force. There was no change to that then.
I mean, but could you really do it? I mean, you had the potential power, but
Well, that was getting less and less, of course. Like what was proof of this thing when I asked the Prime Minister to resign, he refused.
So,
I mean, constitutionally, that's not a thing that happened.
so there was
But
no.
he felt so sure of himself because of the backing of the Russians that he refused. And that went for many other things.
So something as important as the
Yes.
Marshall Plan decision, you would be not even informed of.
Yes.
Because there's no doubt the invitation went out to various of the East European governments as well. And the Soviets, in the long run, told them that they weren't going to be permitted to participate. But come back then.
Thank you.
You then went on down to Florence, is that right? And then the marriage with Queen Anne.
Well, from
And then what?
1948 until 1950, we were trying to find our way, you know. So we used to, with my wife, we used to go between Florence, my mother's house, and my mother-in-law's house in Copenhagen. She's Danish. So this went on for about a year and a half. And then my mother suggested that we should move to England, England being a monarchy, one thing and another, maybe the situation will be easier for us. So we still had to do something, so that is what people call it. I became a farmer. I didn't become a farmer. In fact, we had a very small kitchen garden with hens and vegetables and flowers, and that was the beginning of our earning our life, our means, I mean. So we used to go and sell our eggs. My wife used to go around the local village, and the gardener used to sell the vegetables and so on. This lasted from 1951 until 1955, when we used to still go and see my mother, so we used to come to Switzerland. And I had the luck then in Switzerland to meet a man I suppose many people in the United States know about him, William Lear. He was the, if I can say, the father of the Learjet. There were no jets at the time, but anyhow, he used to produce a whole lot of equipment for aeroplanes. And as a pilot, he's a pilot, we got talking shop, you know, one thing or another, and then he saw my enthusiasm for flying and said, look, I'm going to open an operation in Geneva Airport, why don't you come and join me? So I said, fine. So in early '56, we moved to Geneva, and I worked with him for 2 years, unfortunately too short. I used to test the equipment in the aeroplanes. I used to do demonstration flights throughout Europe. I came to Santa Monica for him and made a 4-month course of advanced flying, instrument flying, it's a bit technical. Went back and worked in Switzerland, and then unfortunately they closed the whole operation and went away. So with a small team of these people that were with him, we formed a little electronics company for automation in industry and plastic at the same time. This went on for about, I would say, 7, 8 years, until the competition was much too strong and the search was much too expensive. We had to close this up myself. So there again we had a few months of not quite knowing where to turn, until again my uncle in Greece was trying what he could to help us. He had an idea to talk to some of these big Greek ship owners to see if there was some means of doing something there. So they came up with the idea that I should become a broker on the New York Stock Exchange. This, of course, was something that was not at all up my line, if I can say, but anyhow, we had to live. So in 1964, I went to New York and crammed in a 1 year's course in about 3 months and a half. Now finally I got my papers, my license. I went back to Europe and worked with this man who is Greek-American. He helped me a lot to get started, and that's how we managed to live and put aside some money.
With a brokerage firm?
No,
You did?
well, I wasn't, he was the head of the firm, I was one of his brokers. So in theory, I'm still on their list now, but with all the things that have been going on for the last years, of course, I can't have any more activity in that part. So, I mean, that's where we are now.
Dare we ask the question, were you surprised by what happened in 1989?
Surprised by the, perhaps the actual moment, and certainly about the violence, yes. Because Gorbachev has been running around Eastern Europe. Whether he was directly responsible or not for the different changes is a bit difficult to know, but anyhow things started to happen. So it was bound to happen in Romania also. But the actual date of December '89 and the violence, that really took us by surprise, and it was very, very worrying, very upsetting to see all these things going on television. You know, you feel very, very unhappy about it.
Did you have information about Romania in these many, many years, more than the average
Well, that is another
sensitive person?
This is another
well-read
thing I
person?
would like to bring out, because many people know we still have a fraction of the extreme right that's roaming around the world. Not a lot of them, but they exist. And plus the communists have been giving out that all these years, from 1948 until now, I have done absolutely nothing for my country. Which, of course, upsets me in a way, because my whole life is my country. And from 48 until now, I have never stopped either giving this message at the end of the year for Christmas or the New Year, or trying to talk to as many people as I can to open their eyes of what is happening in Romania and what the situation was and how the communists infiltrated and so on. Unfortunately, more often than not, this fell on deaf ears. Nobody wanted to listen. The world press, media would not pick these things up. The New Year message used to just give a two-line commentary, and that was all. Maybe it's not fair to say this, but by not publicizing this, what I was trying to do, this has also made the situation difficult for me, because now they say I never did anything when I was doing whatever I could. You know, it's, if you can compare it, as you're having a telephone conversation with somebody, and the other end he puts it down and you go on talking. You know? All our family, the heads of state that happen to be cousins of ours, they listened, they understood, but I could never get anywhere near any government office or person or anything to be able to explain these things. So, in that sense, to answer your question, I've never stopped.
Could I ask just a quick one? Why do you think the changes in Romania have been so limited? Romania, unlike Hungary or Czechoslovakia, really didn't break too far away from the old system. It falls more in the perhaps Bulgaria category than the Polish model. Why were the changes, in your view, so restricted and unadventuresome in a way?
You mean before 1989?
No, since
after?
1989.
Oh,
Since 1989.
Okay.
Maybe for, unfortunately, a fairly simple reason, that the Romanian situation, as compared to the other countries, was very, very much worse. Whether it was because we are Latins, I'm not sure, maybe, but you see the other countries, Eastern Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, with all the oppression that was going on there, you still have a Walesa, you have Havel, someone in Hungary. They managed somehow to have some form of underground there. We had absolutely nobody, because they did away with the opposition in such a brutal manner that tens of thousands of them have died in concentration camps and prisons. So when the situation in '89 happened, and on the surface of things at least, we were supposed to have freedom and so on, there's nobody there.
You had no contact with the internal, I mean, there was no internal opposition to have contact with?
During all these years, it was very, very difficult and dangerous for them to have any direct contact, but I had quite a lot of information coming, yes.
From people who traveled?
No, they couldn't travel, but some people from outside went there for some reason or other. When they came out, they told me about it. Certain newspaper people, which were Romanian origin and so on, they got some information like the press does, and we always kept posted what was happening. Sometimes a little bit late, but we always knew what was going on, and we knew about this thing of the opposition being decimated.
Do you view the present government as a continuation of the Ceausescu government, or as any sort of break?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it the Ceausescu people, because Ceausescu was the product of the system. And that is something that is perhaps not always understood, that these young people that gave their lives in Timișoara and Bucharest, they did not do that to get rid of Ceausescu, although they hated him. But they want to change the whole system, they want to go back to something else. Unfortunately, the people that are there now somehow grabbed the situation and got in power. So they are the continuation of the system. Even if many of them were in positions during Ceausescu's time. They were. They were demoted, they were moved around, shifted, so on, but that doesn't mean much. They were.
Sir, what hopes do you have for the future now? What expectations do you think are going to be happening? If you can be a seer looking ahead in a crystal ball, so to speak. I mean, I know it's, but looking at it realistically as well as hopefully, as you see the future of your country.
Well, sometimes it's a difficult thing to answer, but you know, in the immediate future, I would say I'm not very optimistic. We see what's going on. The economy is in shambles. Morality practically doesn't exist anymore. I'm not trying to blame those poor people back in Romania because of the deteriorating system and moral and so on. It's a question that they had to survive somehow during all these years. So they got into some bad habits to be able to live, unfortunately. In the very long run, I would say, yes, there is a certain point of optimism, because I can't believe that this situation is going to last forever. You see, there's such public discontent going on, demonstrations and one thing and another. But as we know from past experience, these are not the type of people that will just give up so easily.
Do you have any contacts with the present opposition?
No. Oh, with the opposition, yes, some of them, and then a lot of students, intellectuals. There's a whole group of different groups of people that are coming up now. For instance, there's a big group called the Civil Alliance. When I met some of the people there some months ago, there were just about, let's say, 100,000 people. Now they're well over 1 million. And they're spreading in the country. They are non-political.
Is there a leader in that group that you see emerging?
Well, I don't see them very often, but I get news from them. Then you have the whole bunch of young students. I've seen quite a lot of them. They come to Switzerland or France and so on. They want to change, they want democracy, they want freedom, but they don't know how it works. And this is the great point, that the people now in power are not the ones that are going to teach them what democracy means. So, unfortunately, they come to me very often, and they ask me hundreds of questions that for us are elementary things that in our time young boys in school used to learn. And these are students in their 20s, they don't know anything about it. So that proves that, but what is very encouraging is that these people are willing to learn. They're thirsty for the truth. They say that we've been lied, we don't know the history of the country, things have been lied to us and wiped out. We want to know the historic truth about Romania. Here and there, things are starting to move in that direction. For instance, they have no idea about the monarchy. They vaguely, well now a little more, but in the early stages vaguely knew something that I existed somewhere, or something like that in the air. Now they're beginning to realize a little bit more about this, especially after the two events that happened in April and now for Christmas when I try to go back. The reaction, I think, is that, all right, we know nothing, they said all these things all these years, but for the fact that they won't let me back, there must be something else there. So, in that way, things are moving there. But it is a very, very difficult situation. And what we desperately need, really, is technical know-how from the West. The only thing is not in just any conditions, because you have to have some safeguards, because, you know, again from my past experience, whatever help is given money-wise, the system, these people who belong to this system, it goes in the pockets, it goes for political reasons for themselves, and it doesn't go where it should go. I've even heard now, if it's true or not, but it could be, that whatever help is going to come financially is going to be put aside for the next elections. So, you know, it's a very difficult situation.
When you have an entrenched bureaucracy, a political bureaucracy, administrative bureaucracy and the rest, without any infrastructure tending toward any sort of democratic institutions, this makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for any sort of healthy representative feelings to emerge in a coherent way. And so that's, you're painting a very gloomy picture at this point, and I think in many ways it's justified. But there's always that irrepressible spirit of liberty and independence that the Romanians have shown in the past that may counterbalance some of this.
But coming back to the fact that these people are a formal continuation of the system, you have the Securitate, which was the real nasty people that did really awful things. Well, it seems that the ones that did those things have disappeared, they've gone away. But what you do have now is a sort of layer between in this organization now of the state. So when the government tries to do something, or some elements in the government which are really, as far as I understand, good people, they know what should be done, maybe even how it should be done. When they start making reforms in their ministries, this layer in the middle stops everything. You can't get anywhere.
One of the most disconcerting things that happened in the past year was when the miners were transported into Bucharest to, in a sense, beat up the demonstrators. And it showed a violent strain in Romanian political life, and perhaps a degree of militancy on the part of the miners in a strange way. They were told that the fascists were coming back or something like that. Do you have any, what do you make of that sort of event?
Well, this goes to what I said before, that these people hang on to power. I don't think they trust very much of like the army or certain parts of the police and so on. But I mean, what do you call a system that brings vigilantes into the town to beat up people and kill them just for them to be able to hang on to power? I mean, I don't know how to qualify this as a name. You can call it by many names, but this is in fact what happened. And it's all very well to say that they didn't call them, that the miners' initiative, one thing or another, but then why do they go and thank them for having done this?
Well, no matter how events turn out, what role do you envisage for yourself in connection with the future of Romania?
Well, if with God's willing that things will change in Romania, and that I managed to go back, I mean, in the proper situation. I think the role of the constitutional monarchy is, among all the theoretic things that we know more or less, but it's to give peace, civil peace in the country, confidence that in fact something is trying to be done to change, the guarantee democracy, and bring back the morality. And at the same time, you have to reorganize the whole political structure in Romania because it's all gone to pieces. Like the young people that come into these, what's left of the historic parties, as we call them, they're swelling the numbers, but they don't know how a party works, they don't know how to vote, they don't know what elections are. And then we're talking about the elections in a year and a half or so on. How do you expect these people to vote on things when they don't have the first idea about it? This is going to take some time. You have to, I don't like the word of re-education because that's what they use very often, but it is in fact, you have to teach them. And I think that the constitutional monarchy has a very important role to play in this. Especially they have to have confidence that the leaders in the government and so on mean business. Because up to now, unfortunately, they've had so many promises and the actual things happening are not what they said. And they're beginning to realize this.
Is there any basis for a Spanish solution?
Well, the Spanish solution is, of course, the transition between dictatorship and democracy, and that is amply being proved there. And I think that is also one very important thing that one can do there in Romania. I mean, it has to be done.
Were you given any indication when you went back that you would be received by anyone? I mean, was there any indication that your return in December could have led to any other conclusion?
At the present stage, I think it's a little bit premature because, as I said, all these years, not only that the part of the monarchy in our history has been wiped out, but they have been saying such horrible things about the monarchy in general, and me specifically. Although many of them are beginning to realize that this is not so, but they do not know enough. So this is also going to take some time. You can't make, as I said, talk about percentages in this. It's too early yet. Although many of the letters I get and the students and other people, they tell me quite clearly that this is the only solution that they can see.
But no one gave you any indication that if you went back in December, that there would be a possibility of staying for a time and preparing a Spanish
Well, there
transition.
are all sorts of things people say there, but there's nothing really you can
Nothing
put
that
your
you
finger on concretely for the moment.
But did you expect to be rejected that way by the government, not permitted to visit?
Not, I would say, not in this brutal fashion. I realize perfectly well that they're very much afraid of me. Because I represent something that is diametrically opposed to this type of system. It's not my idea. I personally, like many people in Romania, are allergic to dictatorships of any kind. And I think many people realize it, and they realize it's personal.
Did they ever try to kill you?
No?
Did they ever try to kill you?
Well, that's what I've heard, but I've never actually felt it. But in Ceausescu's time, I've had a lot of threatening letters, yes.
Oh, yes.
And then when he didn't work with me, they started threatening my wife and then the children and the grandchildren. Yes, but that's about what he came to.
Sure.
I mean, it's not very pleasant to read these things, but I mean, that has absolutely no influence because I have a duty to the country and that is my whole life.
But members of your family are permitted to visit, are they not now?
Well, that is one of these contradictions in these people, because the two of my eldest daughter and one of her sisters have been many times to Romania. They have been welcomed, not necessarily by the government, but by lots of other people. They cross the frontier of the airport, no trouble whatsoever. They get their passport stamped. And when we come along, then they say it's illegal and fraudulent and some, I don't know what else, you know. So you can see the difference there.
Have they, your five daughters were all educated, of course, in different parts of Europe, I take it. Have they done anything professionally, or what have their lives been like?
Well, my eldest daughter, of course, she worked at the United Nations for some time. She also went to the University of Edinburgh. Professionally, if you like, yes, from that point of view. But then she gave it all up because she came to work with me when things started moving in Romania, already before 89. So now we have quite a nice team. It's a family team as well as other people. And I have tried from the very beginning, since they were quite small, to educate them in the sense that they are Romanians, and to get them to understand what the country is and a bit of the history of Romania. And I must say they feel very much Romanian, which is very, very gratifying, and it's a great help to me.
Could we ask you to comment on the book that some of us had an occasion to read or look at, The Crown and the Sickle? Is it a reasonably reliable account?
No. The man that wrote it, Air Vice Marshal Lee, I knew him quite well already since Romania. You know, again, we come back to aviation. He was the Air Force man, so we got talking, so one thing to another, but he didn't quite get on with his chief, so he left. And we caught up afterwards with him in 1948. He came to see my mother and myself in Switzerland, and he said that he considered this of major importance that the world should know what went on. So we both agreed to let him write this book. So for about a year and a half, he consulted some of my mother's personal notes, and then we talked for hours about what had happened when it was still quite fresh in our minds in 48, 49. So I can say that everything that's in that book is 100%. Because there have been many other books that have been written with all sorts of little things just beside the truth and so on, but this one is absolutely true.
We keep thinking about all the problems that the East European countries will face, and you think of some of the ethnic problems. You look back on the days of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Romanian monarchy, and things were stable. And then, of course, with the communist dictatorships, there was a certain enforced stability. And now, once again, you're going to see ethnic tensions emerging. Do you see it in the case of Romania and the Transylvanian area?
Well, for that I better go back a little bit, because I said part of it yesterday when Transylvania came to Romania. We keep talking about Transylvania because it is the biggest province, because we have Bessarabia, northern Bukovina, which also came to us. Transylvania, of course, has quite a large number of Hungarian minority. They also have a German minority, which is a bit smaller. In our Constitution of 1923, there were very clear provisions about how one should treat these people, and they were assimilated with Romanian citizens because they were living in Romania, they were Romanian citizens, and they had equal rights with any other Romanian, equal rights and equal duties. And that is how I see things should be. In the last few years of Ceausescu, he managed somehow to put them up against him because they started taking their schools away, they wouldn't allow them to use their language. All sorts of these things which for them went down very deeply. And that is the situation we have inherited. The spirits are rather top, can I put it that way, and then there's certain organizations on the Romanian side that I have the impression have been infiltrated heavily by the Securitate people. And you come to a situation like this summer in the town of Târgu Mureș, which was predominantly Hungarian. It needs a little spark of nothing for things to flare up, and that is what happened. They started fighting among themselves, about, I don't know how many, 6 or 7 dead. And you see the government did not intervene for at least 24 hours. So there's something there that's not right at all. The army finally came in and separated them. But since then, they have not tried to calm the spirits. See, they don't give them, they don't have confidence in the government. And then the Romanians, I mean, you have extremists on both sides. You can't help this. But after all, I find it is the government's role, among other things, to try and pacify this thing, but they haven't. And that is something that disturbs me very much. And I think, as far as I know, the Hungarian minority leaders, they know very well what I think. They stay, but the Germans, Saxons, and Timișoara has another group of Germans called the Swabs. The Saxons used to be about, I think, 300 and something thousand. Well, there are only 20-something thousand left. They've all gone to Germany. They can't stand this situation. And that goes also for these young people of our students, which are the future of the country. We have to rebuild the country with them. Last year, the tentative figure at least is 800,000 of them have fled. So they go around Western Europe, France, Germany, Scandinavia. They try to have political asylum, and nobody will give it to them anymore because they say everything is fine in Romania. They consider them as economic refugees, so that doesn't come into it. And there's a very, very difficult situation there.
Do you think it would be possible to move back toward what we call a market economy? I know you're interested in a pluralist, constitutional, democratic system, certainly for Romania. But what about the economy? Would there be great hardships in making the adjustments toward another kind of an economy?
The market economy is in fact what we had before, and that is what we still have to have in the future. But I come back to this mentality of the system. They don't know what this means. It's not in their spirit. So they have liberalized certain small things like shops or restaurants or something or another, but they have not freed the means of production. So then you have these shops open, there's nothing there. They can't get hold of the material and stuff. So I mean, these two things are contradicting. And the laws they pass don't help matters either. And of course, this is what we have to come back to and try what we can for democratization. But I very much doubt that with this particular mentality it can work.
Sir, what you're talking about, it seems to me that it's going to take a long time to get the culture adjusted after the traumatic shock that the people have been through to understand these terms, what the market economy means, pluralism means, elections, and that sort of thing. You have to have some sort of an infrastructure experience.
Well, I have hopes that if the situation changes for the best, I think these people are pretty quick to learn. Another problem because of the liquid economy is that nobody wants to work anymore.
That's right.
They don't want to work because they don't see any future. But one very funny incident happened. Someone that came to Romania walking around the streets there, they asked people different things, and they got hold of a young gypsy fellow, I don't know, quite young, talking about one thing and another, and then they said, they asked him and said, what if the king comes back? So this fellow just turned around and said, well, he comes back, I'll start working again. So
Well, I don't want to.
that's just one little incident, but maybe it shows a trend. I don't know.
I don't want to conclude without thanking you on behalf of not only the Living History Program, but all of us for sharing these experiences with us over these past decades. I know it's been very illuminating and rewarding for us, and I hope it's been of some interest to you to reconstruct those years.
Well, the other thing I can say is I thank you very much for having given me this opportunity, because I think Romania is so little known in the West, and I hope our talks now will be able to open at least the young students of the United States their eyes to some of the truths that went on. Well, thank you.
Thank you.